243 visualizações. Muito bom.
Ao vivo. Shall we start?
Yes.
Okay, then let's do that. So, good morning, everyone in Campinas. Good evening, everyone in Beijing and Suzhou. It's a pleasure to welcome everyone to panel number 5 of the seminar, Defying Sociological Boundaries in the Global Climate Crisis. My name is Niklas Weins. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of International Studies at Xi'an Liverpool Universities in Suzhou, China, and a graduate here of the Environment and Society program at Unicamp. It's a great honor to be back for this event at Unicamp, seeing my former classmates and professors, and to have the pleasure of opening this panel entitled The Sociologists of Development and the Latin American Decolonialists in the Face of Climate Collapse. I want to first thank the organizers, especially Leila, Luciana, and Jolene, but also the community at IFCH and NEPAM that are making this event possible. The seminar synthesizes the discussions we're used to having here in the Environment and Society PhD program at the University of Campinas, and that are very characteristically interdisciplinary from the roots up. It's wonderful to see the development of an intellectual lineage around LABGEC, the Laboratório on Global Dimensions of Climate Change that in the Global South that makes this event possible. The conversation starts with the understanding that as environmental sociologists, we cannot really separate the environmental crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution from any questions of knowledge, power, justice, but also geopolitics that we are discussing here. This panel addresses a crucial question. How can environmental sociology and decolonial perspectives from Latin America help us to better reflect and understand the multiple environmental crises we are facing today? In our discussion so far, we've affirmed that the looming climate breakdown is not only an environmental challenge, but also a deeply social and epistemic one. Climate change, as a complex challenge, on the one hand, is a catastrophic horizon that seems to upend life as we know it on Earth. But at the same time, it also pushes societal and economic as well as political actors to really question dominant models of development, both in the global north and the global south, as well as the frameworks of global environmental governance that have shaped our societies, at least since World War II. By bringing together perspectives from Europe, Latin America, and China, today's panel should allow us to think about the kinds of knowledge production, issues of solidarity and sustainability in a multipolar and increasingly multipolar world. We meet less than 3 weeks before COP30 in Belém, a COP that is symbolically located in the Amazon and hosted by a country that is now back again on the world stage and whose social and scientific community are positioning the country as a spokesperson for the global south and for climate justice. Meanwhile, the Brazilian government continues to also explore fossil fuels and take quick strides to the institutionalization of nature-based solutions, voluntary carbon markets, and ESG governance frameworks in intense velocity, really, that often reproduce the same unequal geographies of development that they claim to correct. All of this is happening in an era of historical geopolitical shifts. Over the past decade, China has consolidated itself not only as a financial and technological actor in climate governance, but also as a norm maker. This renders development sociology and developmental and decolonial critiques indispensable if we want to understand how green projects are justified, contracted, and ultimately legitimated. In my own research on Brazil-China relations, I have been looking at sustainability transitions and different political economic views on sustainability in this relationship over the past 2 years. When Brazil negotiates climate finance or infrastructure with China, it is not only about capital flows in new directions or the possibilities of offsetting carbon emissions of these growing economies. It's the two countries' politics, scientific communities, and social movements that are interacting and often very vocal about their disagreement with global governance institutions, but also with scientific and epistemological assessments of the reasons for the planetary crisis itself. There are many underlying diagnoses with competing assumptions about the world and what the actual problem is here. So this is as much about what the problem is, but also what the legitimate solutions to it are, and that are often challenging Western paradigms, Western scientific paradigms, as well as social movements from the South that have been fighting against this for these definitions for decades. Whether unsustainability is read as a market failure that needs to be priced in, geopolitical symmetry to be undone through the creation of new institutions, or a colonial and historical injury that needs to be repaired, leads to entirely different institutional designs, alliances among different social and political actors, as well as claims to authority on how to solve this crisis. These clashes of worldviews among developmentalists, extractivists, reformist institutionalists, decolonial and even feminist and eco-justice movements are not irreconcilable, just as noise around the climate crisis, but they are sort of a grammar of the environmental crisis that we need to bring together, and this is what we attempt at doing in this panel. So the climate breakdown is not a problem of atmospheric pollution or ecological extinction. It's really a sociological fact of institutions, of finance, of colonial relations, but also of epistemic violence reproduced by hegemonic science. And an expression that the contested scripts of development are really in crisis and maybe even collapse soon. That is exactly the work this panel invites us to do today. So unfortunately, our first speaker, Maria Backhaus from the University of Augsburg, is sick today. So for health reasons, she cannot participate. She lost her voice, which makes it very difficult to give a talk. It's very unfortunate because I was really looking forward to engaging in this as a kind of triangular dialogue between my home country, Germany, Brazil, and China, where I'm now based, and our second speaker comes from. Unfortunately, we will not be hearing the presentation on carbon offsetting and the very exciting research that Luciana has had the possibility to accompany for some time around the logics of offsetting. But instead, we will then move forth with the presentation of my former Tongxue and colleague Gisala, Dr. Liu Si. Liu Si holds a PhD in the Brazil-China research line of our social science program at IFCH from the University of Campinas. She is currently working at the Institute of Science and Development at the Chinese Academy of Sciences in Beijing, China. In her research, Liu Si focuses on Brazilian science and technology strategies and policies, China-Brazil science and technology exchanges, and innovation and cooperation in science, technology, and society studies. And then, to fill the gap, I will take the liberty to talk a bit about my current research that I just hinted at earlier on sustainability in China-Brazil relations from a broader perspective, looking at agriculture and emerging sustainability norms in that field. That's research funded by the Research Development Fund of Xi'an Jiaotong Liverpool University. And then finally, to close off the session today, our discussant will be Zhou Lin, who holds a master's degree from the Institute of Latin America Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, CAS, also in Beijing, and that has its collaborative center at our university in Campinas. Lynn is currently also a PhD candidate in our Environment and Society program here at Unicamp, and her doctoral thesis focuses on the strategic narratives of the Global South with an emphasis on China and Brazil's energy transition policies, green development, and sustainability studies. So with this, let me hand over to our first speaker, that is today going to be Liu Si. You have about half an hour. I'm going to let you know in case you extend very much, and I'm dying to hear what your updated research is about. So the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you, Nicholas. Let me share. Okay, so good evening and good morning, everyone. Today, I would like to share about the experience of China-Brazil electric vehicle cooperation. And since the beginning of the 21st century, the global automotive industry has been undergoing a profound transformation, with green transformation becoming an irreversible trend. Amid this historic transformation, China, leveraging its technological expertise and the industrial advantages in new energy vehicles, is reshaping the global electric vehicle industry. Meanwhile, Brazil, as Latin America's largest economy, also holds a significant position in the global new energy vehicle industry chain and aims to maintain its leading position in green transportation. China-Brazil cooperation in the electric vehicle sector began around 2010. From initial tentative engagement to today's deep integration, the cooperation model between the two countries has undergone a fundamental shift. In particular, since 2023, with the Brazilian government launching an ambitious new energy vehicle development plan and Chinese companies deepening their localization strategies in Brazil, cooperation between the two countries has evolved from one-way technology transfer to mutual knowledge symbiosis. This shift is not only the great significance to the development of the automotive industries of both countries, but also provides a new paradigm for global South-South cooperation. So first, let's have a brief review about the evolution of China-Brazil EV cooperation. The beginning of the China-Brazil electric vehicle cooperation began in 2010. In that year, many Chinese automobile companies began to set their sights on the Brazilian market. For example, JAC Motors, Geely Auto, and BYD began exporting to Brazil. In 2013, BYD established an office in São Paulo, officially starting its business layout in Brazil. In 2014, during the visit of Chinese President Xi Jinping to Brazil, BYD officially announced that it would build a factory there. The following year, it signed a contract with Marco Polo, the largest local bus body manufacturer, marking the beginning of the local assembly of pure electric buses. This phase was characterized by tentative entry. Chinese companies primarily participated in the Brazilian market through export trade with limited technology transfer. Brazil had little understanding of electric vehicle technology, and the bilateral cooperation remained primarily commercial, with no systematic technical cooperation mechanism in place. And in 2015, China-Brazil electric vehicle cooperation entered a substantive phase, with technology transfer activities by Chinese companies in Brazil fully underway. In 2015, for example, BYD completed construction of its electric bus and iron battery module assembly plant in Campinas. which became its research and development center in Latin America. In July of the same year, BYD's first 10 pure electric buses tailored for the Brazilian market officially entered service in Campinas, marking Brazil's first pure electric bus fleet. In 2017, BYD's pure electric bus chassis and the solar panel plant in Campinas were completed and put into operation, marking the beginning of Brazil's localized production capacity for electric buses. In 2018, BYD's battery plant in Manaus commenced production. That same year, the new BYD and Marco Polo D9W pure electric bus, jointly developed by BYD and Marco Polo, officially debuted in Brasilia. It marked a milestone in achieving localized manufacturing. In 2020, BYD's Manaus battery plant began operation, completing its supply chain layout in Brazil. This phase of cooperation exhibits two key characteristics. First, technology export is dominant. The technologies exported by Chinese companies to Brazil are primarily focused on electric buses, including pure electric chassis technology, iron battery module technology, and motor and electronic control technology. BYD Brazil has refined over 100 technologies and established locally based design, manufacturing, and testing processes. Second, localized production has taken off. By establishing a knockdown factory, Chinese companies have begun local production in Brazil. The assembled electric buses feature with Chinese-made batteries and chassis and Brazilian-made bodies, achieving a preliminary integration of technology and local manufacturing. And since 2023, China-Brazil EV cooperation has entered a new phase of intellectual symbiosis. During this period, the Brazilian government launched a series of ambitious policies for the development of new energy vehicles. At the end of 2023, Brazil approved an amendment to the Rota 2030 plan, stipulating zero tariffs on imported electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles starting from 2026 and setting annually increasing localization requirements. In June 2024, the Brazilian government officially established the Green Mobility and Innovation Plan, the MOVER, as a continuation and upgrade of the new Green Rota 2030 plan. The shifting Brazilian policy environment, coupled with the deepening localization strategies of Chinese companies, has ushered in a period of deep integration in bilateral cooperation. The core characteristics of this phase are mutual empowerment and symbiotic development. Chinese companies are no longer simply technology exporters. Instead, they are engaging in in-depth collaboration with Brazil across multiple dimensions, including technological innovation, standard setting, and talent development. This has fostered a mutually beneficial intellectual symbiosis. So today's focus is in the stage of knowledge symbiosis. Entering the stage of knowledge symbiosis, the most notable feature of China-Brazil electric vehicle cooperation is the redefinition of cooperative roles. Chinese companies are no longer simply technology exporters, but have formed an interactive relationship with Brazil. On the one hand, China continues to export advanced technology to Brazil, but on the other hand, Brazil's unique technologies and experience are beginning to be transferred back to China. For example, Brazil holds a world-leading advantage in biofuel technology. As the world's largest producer of sugarcane ethanol, Brazil has accumulated extensive experience in the production, application, and technological innovation of ethanol fuel. Chinese Great Wall Motors introduced Brazil's experience in adapting ethanol fuel and developed the world's first plug-in hybrid system with ethanol capability, which can automatically identify ethanol or gasoline plug-in hybrid engines and has a thermal efficiency 12% higher than that of traditional engines. The other example is the tropical climate adaptability technology. In the research and development of battery protection technology to cope with Brazil's tropical climate, local engineers proposed a unique solution to adapt to strong sunlight and high humidity environments based on years of accumulated climate data, which contributes to make the final results both world-leading and highly adaptable to local conditions. The experience of Brazilian scientific research institutions in areas such as battery high temperature resistance testing and motor dust-proof design has been incorporated into the global technology database of Chinese automakers and used to optimize products in markets such as Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Joint patents and technology achievement transformation is also an important aspect of mutual innovation. As of 2025, Chinese and Brazilian companies have jointly applied for 32 patents in areas such as battery management system and charging protocols. For example, to improve the blade battery's heat dissipation, the local team innovatively added a graphene thermoconductive layer to the bottom of the battery pack, combined with an intelligent temperature control algorithm. This extends the battery's cycle life to 1,200 cycles at 40 degrees, a 20% improvement over the Chinese market version. This improvement became the first core technology patent for a new energy vehicle jointly developed by China and Brazil. Innovation collaboration is a key manifestation of knowledge symbiosis. Chinese companies have established several research and development centers in Brazil. These centers are not simple technology transfer institutions, but real innovation platforms. For example, BYD has established a research and development and after-sales service system in Brazil, covering power battery technology research and development, electrification training centers, and energy solution promotion. Besides, BYD adopts the model of core technology self-research plus local collaboration and jointly established a research and development alliance with 12 local companies in São Paulo state to provide guidance on upgrading their production lines. This alliance model promotes the flow and sharing of technical knowledge among companies. The technology center under construction by BYD Kamastali plant is targeting ethanol hybrid engines, and a team of 100 people from China and Brazil will jointly develop green fuel and electric drive solutions. This large-scale joint research and development project has promoted the common progress of both parties in the field of cutting-edge technology. And the standardization is one of the highest forms of knowledge symbiosis. In November 2024, China and Brazil signed a standardization cooperation agreement, listing electric vehicles as a key area of cooperation. The agreement clearly states the two sides will jointly develop technical standards in areas such as electric vehicle charging interfaces, battery safety, and intelligent connectivity within the frameworks of ISO and IEC. They will also jointly develop technical specifications tailored to local needs, such as high temperature tolerance standards for charging facilities and a certification system for flexible fuel hybrid technology based on Brazil's tropical climate and ethanol fuel resources. A joint research mechanism for electric vehicle industry policies will be established, simultaneously promoting the integration of China-Brazil new energy vehicle subsidy policies and carbon emissions trading systems. This agreement marks the advancement of cooperation between the two countries from technology output to rule-making, laying the institutional foundation for knowledge symbiosis. Chinese companies have been deeply involved in the development of Brazil's electric vehicle standard system. For example, GAC Group. In May 2025, GAC signed a comprehensive strategic cooperation agreement with Inmetro of Brazil. Subsequently, in June and August, GAC sent technical experts from various fields to participate in the drafting of industry regulations related to the electrification of the Brazilian automotive industry. This involvement goes beyond simple technical advice. It is in-depth participation in rulemaking. Knowledge symbiosis is not only reflected in technology and talent, but also penetrates into every aspect of industrial ecosystem. Supply chain integration is the foundation of industrial symbiosis. BYD's Brazilian factory's local procurement demonstrates deep supply chain integration. The positive electrode material for its power batteries comes from lithium mines in Minas Gerais. The motor controller chips are sourced from the São Paulo Semiconductor Industrial Park, and the seat fabrics are sourced from the cotton spinning base in Rio Grande do Sul. The local procurement rate has reached 65%. This vertical integration has reduced supply chain costs by 22% and increased response speed by 40%. This Made in Brazil, Designed in Brazil model has driven Brazil's transformation from a simple assembly base to a technology innovation center. Furthermore, the entry of Chinese companies has driven the development of the entire industrial chain. For example, BYD's factory has spurred the growth of over 200 local parts manufacturers, forming a complete industrial chain from battery materials to vehicle assembly. BYD has also attracted 12 core suppliers, including Cattle and Inovance Technology, to set up factories in Brazil. Meanwhile, BYD has actively nurtured local parts manufacturers, forming a cluster around the factory encompassing industries such as batteries, motors, electronic controls, and auto parts. Green development is an important link for the knowledge symbiosis between China and Brazil. For example, BYD's new Brazilian factory in Camaçari uses 100% renewable energy, becoming the first auto manufacturing base in Latin America to achieve zero carbon operations. The factory is equipped with a rainwater recycling system, which saves 30 standard swimming pools of water annually. This green manufacturing model not only provides a model for Brazil's industrial transformation, but also enriches the green development experience of the Chinese companies. Brazil's abundant hydropower and solar energy resources provide a natural advantage for the development of electric vehicles. Chinese companies have learned how to fully utilize the local clean energy advantages and develop products and solutions that are deeply integrated with the local energy system. So China-Brazil EV cooperation demonstrates the enormous potential for cooperation among developing countries in the new energy vehicle sector. Through complementary strengths and mutually beneficial outcomes, the two countries have achieved leapfrog development. This collaborative model provides valuable lessons for other developing countries and demonstrates the unique value of South-South cooperation in promoting industrial upgrading and technological advancement. The success of China-Brazil cooperation lies in its transcendence of conventional technology transfer, achieving knowledge-based symbiosis between the two sides. In the early age of cooperation, technology transfer helped Brazil build its industrial foundation. As cooperation deepened, knowledge symbiosis enabled both sides and to achieve mutual advancement. This gradual spiraling cooperative model provides a valuable reference for technological cooperation between other countries. More important, China-Brazil cooperation has successfully integrated localization and globalization. Chinese companies haven't simply copied other domestic models to Brazil. Instead, they have deeply understood local market needs and implemented extensive localized innovation. Furthermore, Brazil's unique strengths and innovative achievements have bolstered the globalization strategies of Chinese companies. This model of integration represents the future direction of international cooperation. Even more important, China-Brazil cooperation has always been guided by green development, promoting sustainable development in both countries through technological and model innovation. From the zero carbon operation of BYD's factories to the development of ethanol hybrid technology, until the full utilization of clean energy. The cooperation between the two countries embodies the concept of green development. This collaborative model centered on green development provides a practical example for global efforts to address climate change and promote sustainable development. Looking ahead, China-Brazil electric vehicle cooperation faces new opportunities and challenges. Though factors such as the rise of global trade protectionism, intensified technological competition, and heightened localization requirements pose new challenges for cooperation. The accelerated global energy transition, the rapid growth of Brazil's new energy vehicle market, and the deepening political trust between the two countries all provide favorable conditions for cooperation. In particular, Brazil will host the COP30 conference in next month, which will serve as a key platform for showcasing the achievements of China-Brazil cooperation and promoting global climate governance. So that's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liu Si. Very interesting insights into the technological front here that I think will give us a lot of food for discussion with the audience. I see we have a few people online and a question. Should we maybe let's hold the questions for afterwards, because I think Jolene also has prepared a few things to ask and discuss. And maybe I'll just take the bongji and continue on exactly with the positive momentum that you were just talking about, because that's also the starting point for agro side of the cooperation between Brazil and China. All right. Okay. I hope I'll do as well with the time, because this was a spontaneous presentation that I'm bringing in. So I wanted to talk a bit about growth and contradictions, stirring the debate a little bit towards also a critical assessment, because I think that's what we want to get to in this panel, even though now our focus is not so much purely on Latin America and on the theoretical side, but we're taking it to a slightly more empirical and policy as well as technological development side. I hope that's okay with the audience. That's what we could come up with with the falling ill of Professor Maria Backhaus. So I'm going to give you a short overview of sustainability in Brazil-China relations and to the emerging field in sustainable agriculture, which looks promising, but maybe not as quickly as advancing as we have just seen in Liu's example of the automotive industry. So Liu was just talking about how the moment of Brazil-China relations is quite positive. Brazil and China have just at the end of last year elevated for the third time in their relationship, their partnership, to a China-Brazil community for a shared future, for a more just world and more sustainable planet. When Xi Jinping came to visit for the G20 summit, this is a continuation of this relationship between the two biggest developing countries in their respective hemispheres. The Chinese government often makes reference to understanding the importance that Brazil has for the development discussion. Back in 1993, the two countries signed their first strategic partnership that was in 2012 elevated to a global strategic partnership. The two countries celebrated 50 years of their diplomatic engagement last year, and elevating and putting sustainable development and a sustainable planet into the title of this partnership, I think shows us that it's very high on the political agenda already, both in diplomacy, but also in economic development, as well as scientific cooperation between the two countries. So I'm going to give a short overview of how sustainability more broadly entered the jargon, the cooperation on the environment, more focused on agriculture and forestry between the two countries. Then I'll present some preliminary findings from a book chapter that that is currently under review for a book on China's green soft power. I'm partnering with João Kumaru from the Northeast Consortium, where we discuss the energy sector and the agricultural sector as two fronts of China's emerging green presence in Brazil, and then talk a bit about the geopolitics of nature-based solutions as an example of this emerging leadership from the Chinese side. So we already mentioned, and those of you who are watching from Brazil will be very aware of the difference in moment or momentum. Since I started my research on this Brazil-China issue and sustainability 6 years ago, the overall tone and the importance of sustainability in that relation has changed quite a bit, especially with the political changes in Brazilian politics. It's both politically but also economically quite a significant moment of changes, of transformations, of the government committing itself to sustainable development. The two countries back in 2023 signed a joint statement on combating climate change and issued a communique on deepening their global strategic partnership, which was then last year turned into a partnership that has sustainable development and planetary dimensions high on its agenda. Last year, 37 bilateral agreements were signed, among which agriculture, infrastructure, energy, and science and technology featured very prominently. But also with the US-China trade dispute going on, we see huge amounts of trade shifting from China's dependency on a few products, especially soy trade, which features very prominently in Brazil-China trade, with a record 150 billion US dollar trade volume, and Brazil exporting more than 100 billion US dollars worth of products to China. We also had this moment of the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Silk Road, being in everyone's mouths in the China circles, research circles in Brazil. We were looking into and hoping for, but also being quite skeptical of the moment of Brazil's signing on to the Belt and Road Initiative. Ultimately, that didn't happen, but the two governments agreed that within their cooperation within the BRICS and an alignment of policies with Brazil's new PAC program for sustainable development, as well as the Indústria Brasil program that Leuce was referring to earlier, and the ecological transformation program, there would be lots of synergies, possible synergies between in developing sustainable development within these existing frameworks already. When we look back at the environment in Brazil-China cooperation, and more specifically on materialized agreements, we see that back in 2005 there was a first agreement among China and a Latin American country, which was Brazil, the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture, that back then signed this agreement with the Environmental Protection Agency. China in that moment did not have a Ministry of the Environment yet, and probably from a technical learning kind of perspective, Brazil was regarded as an environmental power of which China wanted to learn more. So there were clauses on exchange of information, policy, technology as priority areas, and forest management, water quality, and the marine environment were main issues that were discussed in this earlier agreement. In this time, in that decade, back when we see Lula was in his second presidency here, back in this time, China was developing its framework of ecological civilization that was starting to appear in speeches in 2007 by Hu Jintao, and that was later taken up when Xi Jinping assumed the presidency of the People's Republic in 2012. And this is also when this term of ecological civilization entered into the party constitution of the Communist Party of China. The understanding under which the Chinese government took on environmental politics was through the assumption within Marxist theory of us coming from an agricultural civilization, going through a period of industrial civilization, but that would eventually have to be overcome to get to the stage of an ecological civilization that should be achieved by the centennial of the Communist Revolution in 2050, and China would become an ecological civilization. In the early years, this concept was not very specifically defined. The material and ideological changes that we have seen that this concept brought was the goal on first eradicating absolute poverty by 2020, and then within the next 15-year plan, realizing the basis for socialist modernization and building a beautiful China. This idea of cleaning the environment became increasingly important. And is becoming increasingly important now in the 14th and the upcoming 15th 5-year plan. These elements are quite important. Ecological protection as well as a clean environment are becoming more and more important issues for the Communist Party. So much so that the idea of ecological construction alongside economic, political, cultural, and social construction now became the fifth pillar of socialism with Chinese characteristics. And this term of ecological civilization was adopted into the national constitution in 2018. Under these ideas of ecological civilization, the construction of ecological civilization, we have 6 sub-principles. I'm going to highlight just a few of them. One important one is the valuation of ecosystems and ecosystem services, as we refer to them in the West a lot more, where we have kind of this separation between humans and nature, and the prominence of market tools that Professor Backhaus was going to talk about in a bit more detail, and I hoped to have some dialogue on it. So this idea of the 2 mountain theory, the green lucid waters and lush mountains are invaluable assets, understanding the economic significance of a clean environment. And then the principle of building a global ecological civilization, the final principle that we see in Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics and on ecological civilization, which affirms that China must be deeply involved in global environmental governance. We've seen some evidence of this principle guiding China's approach to global environmental governance in the Rio Conventions. We had the involvement and kind of successful involvement of China in the Paris Agreement. China hosted the convention, the COP of the Convention on Desertification, where it could show its advances, its built up scientific capabilities on that front. And back in 2020, the Convention on Biological Diversity was supposed to be hosted in Kunming. It ended up happening in Montreal, in the host institution of the convention, but with the hosting of the Chinese presidency, because the term under which this COP happened was the construction of an ecological civilization. This is also interesting because the idea that Xi Jinping had with bringing the COP into Kunming, which is the capital of Yunnan province, is probably quite similar to that idea of Lula bringing the climate COP into the heart of the Amazon. The 2 regions are the biologically most diverse regions of the country. They are peripheral in their geographical position, and are quite symbolic of each country's long relationship with the environment. So now China has these big goals of lowering its carbon intensity by the end of this year, peaking carbon before 2030. Predictions are that 2027 or 28 this could already be reached, and then reaching carbon neutrality by 2060. And this has been achieved by reforms in several sectors. So the energy sector being one of them that has probably shown the clearest results, by eliminating air pollution, which was Liu Si's thesis, doctoral thesis topic, actually. Another one, material one that was a lot slower, as it goes with ecological cycles, is a massive investment in forestry policy. So putting that second principle that I mentioned of ecological civilization, of valuing ecosystems and investing hugely in ecological restoration, especially of mountaintops, to secure the basis of the Yellow River in the north, that frequently suffers under droughts, and the Yangtze River that frequently suffers from floodings and extreme rainfall events, and where a functioning ecological environment, especially forest ecosystems, but also a more sustainable management of agricultural lands, heavily contributes to lowering the impacts of these increasing extreme weather events in China. Here we see a study that was published in Nature Sustainability back in 2019, where the authors mapped, based on satellite imagery, the contributions to greening trends between 2000 and 2017, highlighting how China and India, 2 countries from the global south, have been contributing a lot to global greening trends. The south of Brazil has also been been a hotspot of greening trends, whereas the Northeast, the Mato Piba region, has been a hotspot for deforestation. So contradictory policy results here. But the point for me bringing this in is that these gains, especially by India and China, were made in combination with agricultural policies, which very much challenged definitions of what an ecosystem, what a forest, what conserved land really is. And this paper, if you want to look it up, it's got a huge citation response, because Western conservationists were very much questioning how these huge gains in Chinese forestry area and leaf area that they measured through satellite imagery were actually not real ecosystems. So some controversies unleashed here on the environmental and green contributions, which bring us to the central theme of today's panel, which was around trying to understand Latin American environmentalists, their alliances, and their understandings and definitions of environmental protection. And I wanted to highlight how Brazil-China cooperation has been one of those spaces where existing conservation norms have been contested, where science has been produced and debated, and where new institutional arrangements actually happen. So the Tropical Forests Forever facility that we're hearing about a lot more around the COPs was announced back at COP28 in the United Arab Emirates, and is now becoming an increasingly the main space for discussing about conservation and forestry policies among the countries of the BRICS. The BRICS, you will have heard about the extension of the BRICS towards including the Arab countries, as well as Indonesia, Malaysia wanting to become a member, and this aligning with the idea or the interest of tropical forest countries, as well as a space for discussing about conservation mechanisms, definitions of what sustainable forest management is in different multilateral climate, biodiversity forums, as well as certification norms. So the TFFF, as it is known and will be a huge topic at COP30, we can be sure of that, is an interesting space in which Brazil and China, along with other countries from the global south like Indonesia and Congo, but also Ghana, Mexico, and Colombia, highly biodiverse countries, are aligning and have a space to define their own agendas, both in science but also political, as a political space. So now I'm going to talk a bit about, this was the introduction for giving us some food for thought for discussing about the role and the controversies that exist in the emergence of China as a green power in Latin America, in Brazil in particular. And I'm now going to talk about this book chapter that I mentioned that is currently under review in Cambridge University Press, where my co-author and I looked at the agricultural sector and the energy sector as two facets of China's green leadership, green soft power in Brazil. And just to sum up and give us something to talk about that I wanted to bring into the debate for today, is how technological and environmental cooperation between the two countries happen at very different paces. And I think Liu Si's data that she just presented here goes very much in line with what we have found for the energy transition as a whole on a broader spectrum, which is on the one hand, the agricultural sector, we have a very slow transformation. Brazil and China are both exposed in terms of their reputation, with their impact on the one hand, Brazil with its direct and indirect drivers of forest loss, China's growing middle classes raising demand for beef, but also milk products that demand animal feed, cheap animal feed that can only be produced at large scale, at least in the logic that it's functioning at the moment, but also a normative pressure that is emerging around defining sustainability and redefining sustainability on terms that work for both countries. In the agricultural sector, we found that the Chinese food security logic is still a dominant driver in this relationship between China and Brazil. Despite that, wanting to make sure there is enough affordable food for the population in China, we see that there is an emergence of deforestation-free pilots, certification schemes. So just last year, the Chinese grain trader COFCO, a state-owned company, has imported its first shipment of 1.5 million tons of deforestation-free certified soybeans certified by the Tropical Forest Alliance. But then there are also conservation organizations in Brazil that are talking regularly to Chinese actors, to the Chinese Meat Association, for example, with the program Boi na Linha, or Beef on Track program, that is becoming an increasing response to the critiques of Brazil's relationship of providing meat and soy to the Chinese market. And then there are also subnational initiatives like the Green Passports Initiative that is being mediated by the Beijing Global Environmental Institute, GEI, that is articulating a way of making sure that Brazilian laws, environmental laws, are being respected in the state of Mato Grosso with the Brazilian or Mato Grosso Institute of Meat, and making sure that these standards comply with Chinese norms, and making the certification of these green passports for meat possible in China to raise consumer awareness, because that is another factor that we see. The driving force behind the greening in the agricultural sector in Brazil-China relations is much more policy driven than market pressures, as we see, for example, from the European Union. Another interesting space that we do see, however, where there's much more political kind of insurgent cooperation is on the smallholder, on the level of the smallholder. So the Brazilian MST, the landless movement, is collaborating with different Chinese stakeholders to promote cooperation, to learn from family farming, and also to benefit from the very differently structured Chinese agricultural machinery sector. So we have much smaller average land plot sizes in China that is much more compatible, I would say, with the Brazilian smallholder market. The University of Brasilia and the Chinese Agricultural University, CAO, last year signed a cooperation agreement on family farming, having a cooperation center, and there were 2 shipments of machinery to the Northeast, first of all, and then the introduction and a memorandum of understanding for the construction of an agricultural machinery factory in Maricá, in the state of Rio de Janeiro. So there's this tension in the agricultural sector between this kind of corporate environmental food delivery system with relatively careful, sometimes shallow reforms on bringing sustainability in some way into the meat and soy imports and exports for the Brazilian sector. This is entering the agenda. So the high-level cooperation body, COSBAN, that coordinates agendas between the two countries, now has a subcommittee on environment and climate change. And there have been repeated missions by Brazilian NGOs and institutes like Imaflora or the Amazon Research Institute to China to better understand their Chinese counterparts, the Chinese policy environment, as well as the market, to better respond to and understand how they can better raise environmental compliance on the Brazilian side. The picture is quite different on the energy front. That is the second case that we look at in that book chapter, which is very fast, very visible, and a very much hard infrastructure-led kind of greening that we identify here. So for the energy sector overall, and I think that goes in line with what we've seen about the electric vehicle market, China has been a pivotal foreign actor in Brazil's energy transition, especially through its investments in energy infrastructure, transmission infrastructure. So about 45% of Brazilian of the investments that come into Brazil from China are already in the electricity sector. There is one study that even with a questionable methodology, I would say, but or debatable methodology, that even links 72% of all Chinese products that are conducted in Brazil to some type of sustainability criteria. So showing that sustainability is a driving force, especially in the energy sector. But that also brings technological dependency that with the Nova Indústria Brasil policy, so the industrial policy side of things, have also sparked debates about new dependencies, the demands for technological transfers, and local contents rules that Ljosa has also mentioned here, which get some of the industrial and policy actors a little worried. So this green dependency that is being created in the energy sector. But it is certainly undebatable that the investments that came through the knowledge brought in by State Grid for the transmission infrastructure to transport energy, the energy-rich, especially water, hydro energy-rich north, and the water and solar solar and wind energy, solar and wind energy rich northeast of Brazil, to transport the electricity generated in these areas to the consuming areas of the southeast and south in particular. So the core of China's green soft power in the energy sector is a lot clearer when we look at this idea of China's green soft power. A lot of capital entering, high-tech upgrades happening, and just the speed at which the transformation is happening thanks to cheaper Chinese goods and services that are coming in, as well as the knowledge that this brings on the energy transition. I'm going to skip, in the interest of time, to the recognition of the links between the exports, the Brazilian exports from Brazil, from Brazilian municipalities with deforestation. That is a critique that we often hear, especially linked to the rise of Chinese middle classes and their meat consumption. And there have been lots of studies from Western and now also Brazilian scientific, as well as NGO actors, like this one by Plataforma Cipó, that looked at the growth in commodity exports and deforestation heavy municipalities in Brazil, trying to demystify a little bit, but understand also the patterns at which deforestation happens. There are many different definitions or understandings, baseline scenarios that we see in this debate that benefit or harm the data on this, or make it very malleable to different arguments. So this is quite a heated debate as well. a lot of the drivers that we see when we talk about direct deforestation, China's direct links to deforestation in Brazil's agricultural frontier are actually quite low, but the more difficult to understand indirect drivers of deforestation due to market pressures that then set off a chain of deforestation are a little higher. This study by Vieira et al. Demonstrates this data a little bit. It's an interactive database that you can access through this link, which you do not have access to. On the Chinese side, there is a worry about these, a recognized worry about the impacts that that soft commodities have, like soybeans, palm oil, beef imports, but also cocoa beans, coffee, and wood products that are all connected to more demand on the Chinese market. And the China Council for International Cooperation and on the Environment and Development, CCICED, has launched a series of annual reports on exactly this issue. And as I mentioned just earlier, there was a first shipment of 1.5 million tons of deforestation-free certified soy. This was obviously a drive from the political side, understanding the reputational risk that is connected to this deforestation connection that is present in Brazil, that is often linked to a lack of fiscalization, monitoring on the Brazilian side, linked to underfunding of environmental agencies, that of course the buyers of soy want to avoid as much as possible. So they partnered with the Tropical Forest Alliance to provide to the Chinese dairy company Mengniu this first shipment of deforestation-free soy. Then the other pilot that I mentioned that is organized between the Global Environmental Institute of Beijing, which is currently going through a restructuring, so you might not find their website under this name at the moment, but they have been partnering with the institute, the Mato Grosso Institute for Meat, to respond on the one hand to the tendency for safer foods in China, so not necessarily the idea and awareness of the impact that food and soy products and dairy products will have on deforestation in Brazil, but also trying to understand how much of the Chinese market is willing to pay more for a premium for climate-friendly or at least less environmentally harmful products. And the meat, the quality of the meat is definitely one factor that was identified as the Chinese market being willing to pay more for, as well as proper traceability of the supply chain. So far, in different areas, so we've in the tea sector, in seafood, and in palm oil, there has been relatively little uptake of these ecological certification mechanisms. A lot of the times due to a lack of involvement of industry associations that should adhere to these standards and then push them more onto the market, causing awareness and better compliance in the food chain. But obviously, this also produces a logic of finding solutions through market-based instruments, which we can discuss about, I hope, among ourselves, in how far this continues to create power relations, imbalances in power relations, but also this whole idea of compensating, offsetting of impacts, being a fix to a system that maybe shouldn't even be as big as it is in the first place. The other topic, I don't know if we have time for me to get into this. Luciana, what do you think? Is there another 10 minutes, 7 to 10 minutes? Or should we wrap up and get to the discussion?
You decide. It's up to you.
Tanto faz.
Yeah.
then I'm going to shove just a little bit more information into you, and make use of this other paper that I would use the time to promote then, which is on nature-based solutions. So we have seen, I've just talked about sustainability in Brazil-China relations, and the impact in the agricultural sector as well as the energy sector, and where we're seeing the transformation happening in this bilateral relationship. What I want to now focus a bit more on is China's engagement on the global level, a slightly different topic, but that also reflects, I think, more broadly into these debates that I opened with, which is the definitions, the epistemological definitions of nature, and the dialogues that can come out of a South-South dialogue on nature, what it means to protect it. So nature-based solutions is a term that has been around a lot. The term was actually coined and brought into global conversations on a much broader scale at the Climate Action Summit in New York back in 2019, where China and New Zealand co-sponsored a specific working group on this term and proposing it as a solution to the climate crisis. Then a few weeks later, there was a discussion in the new Beijing review on Chinese-style nature-based solutions, as the Chinese government was trying to get more engaged in global environmental governance institutions and networks, to talk about nature-based solutions as a climate and biodiversity solution. So nature-based solutions, for those who are not familiar with the term, are defined by the International Union of the Conservation of Nature as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously building human well-being, or providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So this is mangrove restoration, urban parks, and urban flooding buffers, restoration of degraded lands to store carbon, to restore soil fertility, but also in the fight of desertification, as well as green infrastructure like wetlands, that are key for purifying water quality, for providing habitat for species, for local species, and also countering this logic of gray infrastructure. So rethinking our relationship with nature, and this is where I think China, as a newly emerging environmental power, with its civilizational history that it's reinterpreting under this ecological civilization umbrella, is really an interesting partner to look into for these dialogues, to question, maybe to break it down, exactly this understanding of what is a natural ecosystem, what is a modified ecosystem, what does it mean if you're a culture, a country with a 4,000-year history, whereas the untouched natural stage that you want to get back to if you want to ecologically restore your landscapes. And so why this is interesting is this came out of a debate with my collaborator Anna Zhu at the University of Wageningen, as well as Juliet Liu at the University of British Columbia, Tyler Harland at Loyola Marymount University, Jin Chen, a PhD student in Wageningen, and our colleague and former student of the Environmental Society program, Fabiana Barbie, as well, where we looked into China's ecological civilization discourse and how it was globalizing. And we found that there was relatively little evidence of engagement from other partners from the Global South. But we do see, after China's uptake of it at the Climate Action Summit, there has been a steep uptake of scientific publications linked to this term, that are linking back in Chinese language oftentimes to ecological civilization, But in English language literature, we don't see as much engagement with the ecological civilization term. China became the top publisher on this term in 2021, overtaking the US and the UK as the two main publishers just before in 2020, as well as 3 European countries that had been heavily producing knowledge as well as policy proposals from within the frame of the European Union that was launching Horizon 2020 projects on these terms. But China is now clearly taking a lead in this. And why this is interesting, again, what I mentioned, is this idea of understanding what a restored ecosystem is, that Chinese projects, Chinese science, and Chinese evidence for its contributions to global greening trends are really starting to question. In the book that my colleague Anna Ju wrote about endangered species conservation, she traced this kind of stark difference in the debate between, on the one hand, protectionism, that is keeping nature to itself, this very romanticized idea of the Enlightenment period of untouched nature, versus the interventionist, very pragmatic approach to dealing with ecosystems in understanding humans as being part of nature and humans having modified ecosystems for millennia, like indigenous peoples in all over Latin America, traditional communities in Africa and Asia, even in Europe and North America, have been used to, but which in dominant scientific discourse is still a questionable idea that gets a lot of backlash. So China's emergence in this space, its contributions to forestry, to landscape modification, landscape engineering, some authors argue, are really bringing in this kind of normative epistemological dimension around nature protection. What we try to do is to understand how China is engaging with nature-based solutions at this front, and if we can see any materializations of this change in discourse through nature-based solutions. And in this paper that we published in Global Environmental Change, we see China's engagement through the CCICED that I mentioned earlier, that has a study on the impacts of China's soft commodity supply chain. The Green BRI initiative, under which a lot of greening initiatives that are using more and more Chinese-produced scientific knowledge, as well as technical training, are being framed. And then an actor in and financer of biodiversity projects, which is the Kunming Biodiversity Fund, which came out of the Kunming Montreal framework that was agreed upon at COP15 in 2022, and that has not been as much of a success yet in financing new projects, in part because of geopolitical frictions that are connected to the existing governance institutions. But then also we are seeing China's engagement with existing institutions. So, for example, the UN Environmental Program at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, where Liu Si works, has the International Ecosystem Management Partnership, which is a huge promoter of ecosystem services, these approaches to ecosystem restoration. And then another interesting example, not an institution, but a program by the African Union, is the Great Green Wall program. You see the close connection here with China's Great Wall. This was not a start of the project. This was an African initiative that eventually ended up reaching out to China, and with several staff from Senegal, from Ethiopia, from Nigeria, and Ghana being trained at the Xinjiang Institute of Geography, that has accumulated a lot of knowledge on ecosystem restoration in desert landscapes. So we're talking here about the Sahel zone, just south of the Sahara Desert, and before, or in northern sub-Saharan Africa, with its 12 countries that are participating in this initiative, and where China has become an increasingly interested and interesting partner for ecological protection bureaus to engage with. Then we have the definition and translation of the nature-based solutions standard by the International Union on the Conservation of Nature, in which China is heavily engaging, promoting best practices based on the experiences it's had with its Grain for Green program, the slope conversion program, as well as the North Shelter Belt program, policies in which large-scale ecosystem interventions have been promoted and are increasingly showing very good results that are contributing to greening. Not so much on the biodiversity front yet, because they are restored, in part even novel ecosystems that are being created. But this is a front where Chinese scientific and political actors are also quite active. And then lastly, the third axis for cooperation, we have seen greening of Chinese infrastructure investments, particularly in Africa and Southeast Asia, connected to hydropower, as well as the construction of railways, which now is also a topic between Sao Paulo and Campinas, where the China Railroad Corporation is building a high-speed train until the end of this decade, I think, and where greening, compensation for environmental impacts with nature-based solutions is increasingly an issue. If you're interested in the details, because of the format for today, I'm just going to point you to the tables that we have compiled in this article in Global Environmental Change. But basically what we did is mapping where we have policy development, funding, research, engagement of either Chinese-led, China-based institutions or triangular cooperation mechanisms, where China is engaging on nature-based solutions. This is obviously also integrated heavily with the Belt and Road Initiative, so greening the Belt and Road Initiative all the way from Southeast Asia, Central Asia, to Africa, where Chinese actors are partnering with existing mechanisms, for example, the China-ASEAN Environmental Cooperation Center, or the FAO China South-South Cooperation Program. And Latin America is, as the furthest continent from China, slowly catching on to these debates, and we're very much looking into how this has been growing over just the past 4 to 5 years. And that's especially interesting with the upcoming COP30. So we're just 3 weeks away from COP30 happening. At the last COP, Brazil presented its Green Way program, where the Brazilian government is looking into financing its large-scale restoration of 40 million hectares of degraded pastures and underused agricultural lands, which is where there's a lot of potential for just ecological restoration at a relatively big scale. And where the ecological impacts of agriculture could be lessened, while at the same time partnering with China to intensify and make more efficient production of meat production, to also lower the environmental impacts that are unavoidable. In this whole debate, of course, there's a lot of conversation around payments for ecological services and compensation mechanisms, as well as offsetting, that Professor Backhaus was going to talk about, and that I was very curious to engage with exactly with these examples. But I hope our audience will have some piercing questions, suggestions, or data to share for us to further kind of start to question from Latin American environmentalists, feminist perspectives, for example, on who bears the cost, how these costs are distributed. But I'm getting ahead of myself with that. So just to wrap this up then, for us to get into the discussion and looking into into the future for China-Brazil cooperation. Both countries are great environmental powers already. Brazil has been, since its democratization, its hosting of Rio 92, and China is an emerging environmental power that is intimately connected with Brazil through several of the environmental challenges the two countries are facing. I would argue that ecological civilization as a framework is, on the one hand, an excellent framework to do this. We've had a nice discussion with Leila and Professor Roberto Guimarães for some time already about what a global ecological civilization would look like, what a Brazilian ecological civilization would look like, if there is any way to respond to this. But for the moment being, it's a completely underused framework for environmental cooperation, maybe because of a lack of understanding. And I think under this framework, a very different way of environmental, the definition of environmental standards, but also mutual learning, cooperation mechanisms, science exchanges, technology exchanges is possible. China is now probably on the richer side of things, of being able to provide capacity building to help Brazilian actors to bring forth their positions. The Brazilian government has done an excellent job over the past few weeks and months in articulating its agendas in preparation for COP30. So we're going to see, I think, a lot of very productive outcomes in Brazil-China cooperation, in the Tropical Forest Alliance, with the Congo and Indonesia, where I think these terms of ecological civilization are certainly going to pop up a lot more. And with that, I'm going to close for today with a picture with lots of saudades of our IFCH. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the debates.
Well, that's a very impressive lecture, especially for the Lucy and Nicholas. And I don't understand, we need to answer the questions.
So with that, do we want to have our debater, Jolene, join in with her comments?
Okay, I will start my debate. And from the Lucy's lecture, I have some of the ideas about her lecture, and especially about the national logical behind China-Brazil cooperation in the EV sector. Because I just divide in 3 levels. The first level is like a developmental logic, because we all know that China is facing the industrial upgrading. From the perspective of developmental logic, China seeks to expand its major EV production capacity and supply chain advantages abroad, using electric vehicles as a vehicle to export its green transition achievements and promote the construction of Green City Road. And this strategy of the exploitation of the EV sector also serves to diversify markets and avoid some of the trade barriers between China and the United States imposed by the United States and Europe also. And for Brazil part, and cooperation with China within the electrical vehicles can also support its goals of high value-add manufacturing and reindustrialization, reducing dependence on primary export with a clean electricity markets, because we all know that the Brazil electricity market is very clean. It's just about 80 renewable resources Brazil can leverage its energy advantage to foster sustainable EV growth while attracting Chinese investment and some of the technological equipment or technology skills to achieve green growth and job creation and technological localization. And from the level of the geopolitical level, EV can also bring some of the benefits for both countries. And EV cooperation becomes a very symbolic project of social collaboration, and it illustrates how developing countries can jointly address climate and energy security challenges through technological cooperation. In the context of global supply chain restructuring context, and Brazil can serve as China's strategic hub, linking Latin America and the broader global south. The projects like News lecture has mentioned, the BYD's new factory in Bahia and some of the very successful projects here in Brazil can replace the former Ford plant and can also represent a definition of the post-Western industrial order. And from the broader stages like the international climate governance and China-Brazil's cooperation on EV sector can also reflect a renewable practice of common but differentiating responsibilities, balancing the rise to development with emission reduction obligations. Rather than following on an aid-basis model, the two countries' partnership promotes a very constructive development narrative through technological collaboration, constructing with the Western approaches. This is also very significant in the international stage. And these are the three levels I can learn, and I can just think about the News's lecture topic involving in national logic behind China and Brazil's cooperation in the EV sector. And just about the Nicholas lecture, I think the Nicholas lecture has a lot of different parts. The parts of the forest, the parts of the vehicles, and some of the China's environmental natural-based solutions, and some of the companies, the coffee and the Monyo companies, how they did some of the importation of the soybeans from from Brazil to China, and some of the risks, society risks have already existed here, and how we solve these problems, and are also very significant. And as for me, I think that the potential risk is also very important. Combined with my project, I think that this process can reveal some of the cooperation with China and Brazil can not only bring some of the positive impacts, such as some of the levels I have already mentioned, but it can also reveal some of the contradictions between the two countries. The explanation of the soybean trees, for example, and its infrastructure projects has increased a lot of environmental pressures on sensitive ecosystems such as Amazon. We all know that the importation of the soybeans from the Amazon can produce a lot of environmental problems, raising some of the problems of green extractivism and uneven ecological responsibilities. So when we talk about the cooperation, especially the cooperation, the hot topic because between the cooperation within China and Latin America, especially within the cooperations with China and Brazil, we can not only think about the benefits of the cooperation. There are a lot of impacts that is negative, are also always being ignored by the communications, by the journalists, but as academic research, we need to consider the very complete or the very comprehensive impacts, not only for the good benefits and the negative benefits. We should also to reveal that. So from the two our colleagues, my professor, lectures, and I learned a lot about the China-Brazil Green Cooperation and some of the areas of energy transition, some of the energy, even some of the solutions. That solutions can give us a more strategic practice and to influence the government, influence the communication department to communication department to know how we should to do in the future to let us to get more benefits or get more good implications from the two countries cooperation instead of just bring some of the negative impacts between the two countries' cooperation. And thanks a lot for your lecture. And here I also have some small questions for you. Can I ask one question for Liu Si? And for me, it's like you are always talking about some a cooperation between China and Brazil, but the cooperation between China and Brazil is among the global south countries. So I think that the cooperation between within the global south cooperation can give rise to a decolonial form of climate politics. What do you think about that? Just a comparison with the competition between China and the United States, and we all know that the United States have a lot of problems because they, when they have cooperation with global south countries, they always bring some of the already have the some of the regulars and some of the regulations in the world, and we just like global south countries, we need only to do is to follow the regulations. But as a cooperation based on the global south, we have a more equal and more how to say the justice corporations, and you think that between the cooperation within the global south, we can bring a lot of just bring more positive impacts or some of the effects to confront the Western strategies or Western discourse.
Yes. Thank you for the question. Well, politics is not my area of expertise, but I agree with you. And take Brazil for example. Like most Latin American countries, its colonial history has led to a persistently dependent position in the international economic system dominated by developed countries, and this dependency persists in international scientific and technological cooperation. Western countries like the United States, in their technology transfer to developing countries, often disregard the systematic development of their industrial and technological chains, and leading to a dependent position for developing countries in the technological cooperation. But the South-South cooperation is different, and the cooperation among the countries in the global South is more of a complementary endeavor, and particularly symbiotic development like the China-Brazil technological partnership. As I just mentioned, these collaborative efforts through building advanced and comprehensive industrial and technological chains, it frees the developing countries from technological dependence on the West, and this is a process of decolonization itself.
Oh,
That's
mm-hmm. As for the question for Nicholas, I have also one question for you. As you have mentioned about the natural-based solutions about China, and you have already developed some of the specific areas about the Chinese environmental problems based on these natural-based solutions, or not? Can you just share some of the examples that you have already researched about this kind of the natural-based solutions about China's environmental problems?
Thank you for the question. So basically the solution that, or the conclusion that we got to in that paper that I presented in the third part of my talk today was that Latin America is the region that has least engagement with China on nature-based solutions so far. So most of the evidence we found comes from regions that are historically much closer, of course, to China. Southeast Asia has the biggest amount of institutions, of joint research centers, for example. So through ASEAN institutions, China-ASEAN cooperation, where there is a lot of discourse already. There are specific nature-based solutions research centers which Chinese universities have partnered with. The same happens with African countries in a kind of second wave, I would say, where we've had China-Africa ties expand since the 1980s, 1990s, since the opening up a lot more, and environmental issues started to get on this agenda in the 2000s when ecological civilization ideas were emerging. In the Brazil-China and the China-Latin America picture overall, environmental issues really just started to surge in the 2010s much more broadly, and nature-based solutions have been quite behind on that. There is not that much cooperation on this issue yet. What we do have, and that maybe taking the liberty to respond in parts to the question by Professor José Vicente, there is much more cooperation on the energy front, energy cooperation, solar energy development. There is a center at Tsinghua University, for example, a Brazil-China center specifically for developing the cooperation on this technological front. I mentioned the center at the University of Brasilia for family agriculture. That is a center that was opened last year, that is housed in, I think, the agricultural studies with China Agricultural University, where they are talking about technical issues. They're talking about joint research projects where they talk about standards of conservation, where they talk about pollutants, for example, and fertilizers, biofertilizers that are starting to be a huge issue, have started to be a huge issue since last year, with the global conversations around lowering pollutants. And that is going to be a huge issue for both technological innovation, but also technical training of how to use them and to disperse the knowledge on the local level. But again, for Latin America and China cooperation, green issues, I think they would start with energy transition research, energy cooperation. I think the EV sector is probably a good next frontier example. Conservation, agricultural cooperation, that is a product of the last 15 to 10 years maybe, that has advanced and is doing huge jumps with the development of new inputs, bio inputs. I accompanied a delegation of the Senai, the industrial system of Brazil, that just earlier this year launched an observatory on the bioeconomy that came to China to learn more about what is going on here. But this is in the exploratory stages of creating cooperation mechanisms on that front. And then with I would say the dominant or the bigger actors, the Chinese Academy, the Chinese Cultural and China Agricultural University has had a long history of collaborating with Global South countries, but the discourse of nature-based solutions specifically is something that is very recent, that scientists in all world regions, I think, are catching up on. But that is quite an interesting case of us seeing this term that was coined in the global North, but being much more actively used, redefined, remodeled by Global South actors now to respond to exactly these epistemological differences in our definition of how we deal with nature that contrast with the kind of nature-culture divide that we have in the West, and that is starting to not be reproduced as much in South-South relations as previously, I would hope, at least. Or I see a lot of potential for this new conversations happening around this. How that will then reflect in technical training is to be seen in the next few years, and is going to be great research for our undergraduate students, master students, and new PhD students to look into.
Oh, that's so cool. And I have also have a very personal questions is that because of my interest, because as I see, you have been to China for just before the pandemic, just like 2015 like that, and then you come to Brazil and you stay here to study the environmental policies between the two countries. And then you come, and after the pandemic and after the COVID, you how to say you come to China again to be a professor about teaching this kind of the topics about Chinese people, and what kind of the transformations about Chinese society you have experienced. You can you have some of the ideas about the transformations about Chinese society, about environmental problems that you have some of the obvious changes in China. You have some of the opinions about that.
That's an interesting question. Yes, I mean, as someone who has grown up in the global North, and gone to the global South to study, to do my graduate studies, I've certainly changed my outlook on lots of issues, of social issues, of environmental issues that I think I had a theoretical understanding of before, and I'm getting a more practical understanding of the implications, especially these epistemological ones. The fact that I'm speaking here as a German, being asked for what my interpretation is probably exactly a materialization of exactly that, and that we're not asking a Latin American professor to give us a better answer for this. A woman, an indigenous person, an African descendant person. So of course, like I'm living in these contradictions of the epistemological system, the knowledge systems that we're embedded in, and you asked about my perception of China. We're talking about a country that is developing so fast. I don't know how it is for you, for you too, who are were living abroad, coming back to your own country and not recognizing it. I've heard that from many of the Chinese people I've met over time. My first Chinese teacher, for example, who is from Chengdu, and said, every time I go back, I don't recognize the city anymore. It's not the city that I grew up in, because it's just rebuilt from the ground up. Everything is different, completely different. Just a few temples, a few of the mountains are the same. And not having set foot in China for 8 years probably was a transformation of 30 years maybe, of not recognizing so many of the parts of China that I'd previously been to. But the clearest one that also Professor Leila loves to talk about is the air pollution problem. I was an exchange student in China back in 2013. I traveled to Chongqing, to Sichuan, to Beijing. Air pollution was just always there, especially in the winter. And now we have Mariana Barbieri, who was a PhD student here, loved to show that graphic, the comparison between air quality today in Beijing and air quality today in Campinas or Sao Paulo. The air quality is consistently much better in China than it is in Brazilian cities by now. Maybe with the electrical vehicles, some of that will improve, but that is probably the biggest change I've seen. And then river cleanups that are happening that you see some impacts of, but I think there's still a lot that needs to happen, especially as an environmentalist. I would see the impact of plastic pollution as a huge issue that is not resolved yet. That is just the sheer amount of producing and consuming plastic in China, especially with Waimai, with the iFood culture here, is crazy and through the roof, and I'm very worried about it. So while on the one hand, some indicators are getting a lot better, there's also the ascension to middle classes, to consuming middle classes, that are probably on the government's radar. I'm quite sure it is, but there's no solution to it yet. And coming back and seeing that has gotten even worse from my first time in China, having done some research on waste management, gave me mixed feelings. But I tend to always be hopeful. I'm a subscriber to ecological civilization, so I believe in the long-term planning, in the overcoming of industrial civilization, of the political tweaking of institutions, of consumer behaviors that are very clearly taking place. So I'm curious to see when and how quickly that next step will happen on the consuming front.
Yeah, as an outsider, because you're from the north, from the north countries, I think that as an outsider, your perspective is more obvious than Chinese people, because this is my country. I knew some of the change but I didn't focus on very concentratedly. But for you, I think that your opinions about the air pollution, the river, some of the plastics from the iFuji, Chinese iFuji, this kind of the perspectives are very interesting and also very obvious to understand, or very clear to understand in our daily life. As I know that just we talk about the air pollution, and Yose's dissertation about your PhD dissertation is also like air pollution in Beijing, right? And you think that the air pollution in China is also just like improved a lot. Now the air pollution in Chinese society is reduced a lot in comparison with 10 years before. Right. I cannot hear.
Yes, I did my PhD about air pollution in Beijing. Yeah, but that when my PhD is concluded, the air pollution is solved already. Yeah, that's so quick. But I think now I see that in a little different way, because I see that's a great success for Chinese governance of air pollution, but actually there are some social problem behind that, and that's a need to see for us, because I think the Brazilians, my classmates, always say that they are envy of the Chinese model, that everything can solved so quickly. But actually, as a Chinese, I also think the other way is also make it sense, because sometimes you need to slow down to make sure your politics, your policies is good for everyone, and I think no one should be sacrificed for any reason. So that's what I think for today, not for the PhD research period.
Yeah, your opinion is more like considering the human beings' opinions. It's like more just more how to say more considerable about the human beings, about the environmental society, and your opinion about the risk, the environmental risk, some of the air pollution solutions by the government can also cause some of the effect, the bad effect for our human beings. This opinion is also very important. Not only just for the one aim, just to totally solve the air pollution problems, but some of the bad effects, lateral effects that can influence in our daily life. This kind of the problems the government also need to take into consideration. This opinion for me is also very important. Thank you.
This is very interesting and makes me want to throw back the question at you as two Chinese women who have lived in Brazil and have changed your outlooks towards probably a much more Latin American analysis of the environmental crisis. I'd be very curious to hear from Jolin, maybe first because it's fresher, how your views on environmental politics, on the inclusion of social actors, of different movements, feminist movement, indigenous movement, in the climate policy have, because I know the previous panels have discussed these issues, and it would be very interesting to hear a Chinese perspective on what is going on in Brazil and what maybe could be learned from it.
Yeah,
on the Chinese side.
It's like if you ask me about some of the environmental problems here in Brazil, for me, from my perspective, I think that the Brazilian government do the very good job about how to say the conservation of the forest, just like Mato Grosso. Can I speak a little Portuguese, just like Mata Verde? You know that the forest around the residential areas, the green forests are protected very well here in Brazil, because I live in Campinas. I have been to the Swiss park, and there have a lot of the space only for the Mata Verde. But for me, it's very impressive, because if this situation, the same situation in China, I think that Chinese people, because our population is very big, this is also the problem. So we need to sacrifice some of the green area to just like more people have their accommodation from have more apartments. But in this area, I think that Brazil have a very good job in protecting the conservation, the forests, the green areas in the residential area. I think this is very impressive. And another I think that for me, another very impressive part is like I think that the Brazil have a very complete or comprehensive legislations about how to protect the whole area or protect some of the environmental problems. Because just one thing that for example, if you want to import one food or some of the international things that is related with within the environmental problems, and the most important is have been this food or this production should be registered in the MAPA, in some of the agriculture department, and to have a very strict legislation to get the importation from China, from other countries to Brazil, and some of the protections about reservations in north of the Brazil, in Amazon area. I think that the legislation are very, very complete comparison with China. But China has also some of very good legislation. I just say some of the aspects that I have observed here in Brazil. And in Brazil, another thing I think that is very important is like now I know that the Brazil government, they have passed one policy that in the fossil, the gasolina fossil, they aid some of the sustainable vehicles, just like how to say the ethanol. Ethanol into the fossils. I think that this legislation is also very just like environmental friendly. I think that in China we still don't have these policies, but I also see some of the bad effects or bad comments about the Brazilian people, because these mixed fossils into the car can somehow have some of the prejudice about the car. These are some of the aspects for me. It's like the conservation about green areas in Brazil is very, very completely legislation. I think that this is very impressive. This is also some of the good acts that Chinese people or Chinese government can learn from the Brazil also. Thank you. Now we need to ask also some questions from our live streams. There has two persons who they just put two questions here, and we can answer these two questions, and then we can finish our forum today. And first question is like, I want to. Professor Rosé, he said, I would like to have some information about training in green technology about China and Brazil. I don't know if you can answer this question or not. It's a very specific question though.
This would be more directed towards Liu Si, right? In terms of the vehicles, I've already tried to answer to it a little earlier. I saw the question and kind of tried to respond to nature-based solutions and agriculture part of it.
Okay. I think that's a question maybe for me. Actually, Chinese companies have also carried out green technology trainings in Brazil when they enter the Brazilian market, especially at the stage of technology transfer and the intellectual symbiosis. For example, the new Kamasali plant. The Kamasali city government is working with BYD and the state government for now to promote vocational training to cultivate local youth with skills related to electric vehicles, batteries, and smart manufacturing. I think in the future it will getting more and more this kind of trainings between China and Brazil. I hope that can answer the question.
Okay. And the last question is like, how do you see the Brazilian biofuel capacity to eventually inspiring development or introduction back in China's auto sector? This is very interesting, this problem.
I think also for Liu Si, but I think a question that you already started to answer towards, kind of naturally, Jolene. I would be curious about that as well, Liu Si.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Of course, Brazil's biofuel capabilities are already having an impact on China's auto industry. As I said, well, I personally don't believe this will have a near-term impact on China's domestic auto industry because, as I see, China lacks of a clear advantage in biofuels, so maybe it's not for the domestic auto industry. But it's clear that Chinese automakers will or have already introduced Brazil's experience of combination of biofuel to other markets with similar energy advantages like Southeast Asia. Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. No, okay. Let's just finish our topic today. And thanks a lot for the participation of Lucy and Nicholas, and thanks for your very wonderful and how to say very fantastic lectures for us, and to let us understand more about China and Brazil's cooperation, China's environmental problems, and some of the environmental societies. And thanks a lot. Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you very much.
Ciao.
We also wish Professor Maria Backhaus to get better soon, and hope we will have another possibility to talk to her and have our triangular Germany, China, Brazil dialogue at some point. And now we're looking forward to the final panel, right? There's the final panel with José Batista, Edna, Lara Freitas, Jacqueline Nishi, right?
Right.
Sí.
And then the closing. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Good to see everyone again.
To see
Thanks
you.
for the invitation. Bye-bye.
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 Okay, Jaque, a palavra é sua, please.
Hello, good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us. It's a great pleasure to invite everyone to panel 6. It's the final session of the first international seminar, Defying Sociological Boundaries in the Global Climate Crisis, organized by LABGEC, the Laboratory for the Social Dimensions of Global Environmental Change in the Global South at the State University of Campinas. This event celebrates the 10th anniversary of LABGEC. It was a decade dedicated to advancing the sociological understanding of environmental change and its implications in the Global South. Congratulations to Professor Leila da Costa Ferreira, founder and director of LABGEC, and to all researchers who have contributed to building this remarkable academic and collaborative community. My name is Jacqueline Nishi. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Brazilian Center for Analysis and Planning, and a member of LABGEC, where I research climate governance in the Global South. We are streaming live from Brazil, and we are delighted to have participants connecting from various parts of the world. Before we begin, just a few practical notes. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentations to ensure good sound quality. You are very welcome to keep your cameras on, and you can send the questions through the chat at any time. They will be collected for our dialogue session later. And it is with great pleasure that we open this panel 6, the sociology of urban processes in the planetary climate turbulence. This session invites us to reflect on how urban processes are being reconfigured in times of climate crisis, and how sociological perspectives can contribute to understanding and transforming these dynamics. Our discussion brings together distinguished scholars who will share their experiences and analysis on urban sociology, political ecology, territorial justice, and social movements, exploring the complex interplay between environment, cities, and society. Now, let me briefly introduce our invited speakers. Our first guest is Dr. José Carlos Batista da Mota. He's an assistant professor at the University of Aveiro, Portugal, and a researcher at GovCop. He holds a PhD in social sciences and is former director of the master program in the urban and regional planning. His research focuses on urban governance, housing, participatory planning, and more recently, territorial justice and sustainability transitions. And our second guest, Dr. Edna Castro, is an emeritus professor at the Federal University of Pará and the president of the Brazilian Sociological Association. She coordinates the State, Territory, Labor, and Globalized Markets Research Group and the Center for Advanced Amazonian Studies. Her pioneering work addresses development, political sociology, environmental conflicts, and social movements, with a special focus on the Amazon. Following their presentations, we will have a debate moderated by Lara Freitas, our colleague here at LABGEC, and a PhD fellow on the Environment and Society program at Unicamp. And to conclude, Professor Leila will come back for the final remarks of this event. So without further delay, let's begin our session. It's an honor to invite Professor José Carlos da Mota to open our discussion with his reflections on urban sociology and sustainability transitions. Dr. Mota, the word is now yours, with around 30 minutes for your presentation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here among you and in this very important event. So I will share my presentation that highlights some of the issues and the difficulties and the challenges that we are having. Can you see it? Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I begin with this particular important message from António Guterres that was shared in Folha de São Paulo yesterday about the risk of not having or not or to avoid, or it will be really hard to avoid to cross the 1.5 degrees the increasing of the global temperature. So this was a message from the Secretary General of United Nations. He had a meeting with members of IPCC, and this is particular concerning because in a context of climate turbulence, to have or to not be able to avoid this can bring us particular challenging problems. And talking about planetary turbulence, I think this image from Valencia from last year, it shows and it clarifies how hard and how difficult these problems are. I don't know if you remember, in this day in Valencia, in only 2 hours, it rained equivalent to 1 year. Okay, so it can shows the effects and the implications of our global behavior, and this was particularly damaging in terms of not only these physical infrastructures, but also lives. And so it's a sign. But at the same time, we are having very heat, the increasing of urban heat with more than 55, 45, and in some cases more than 50 degrees in some areas. So we are becoming to create, or we are creating what we can consider that people that cannot live, or there are areas of the globe that eventually in the near future, they will become inhabited. So they will have, it will be impossible to have life there. So to have an idea, imagine living for an entire year with fever, with high fever. Not a day or two, but the full year. This is what the planet has been enduring. We have surpassed these 1.5 above the pre-industrial levels. And this is not a metaphor anymore. This is real happening. This is a diagnostics. And this fever, it's not only environmental, it's also social, political, and moral. And this, in somehow, this is an example of why we are becoming inevitable to have this increase. This, I don't know if you remember this drill, baby drill. This was a phrase from the President of the United States during the campaign. And this was a warning that he will go back to collect the oil from soil and to drill this gas and to reuse again what we consider the fossil energy. And this creates problems. I heard Jeffrey Sachs, I don't know if you know him, he's a professor from Columbia University, and he was an advisor of the United States Secretary General, and he was behind the creation of this SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And he once recently in a conference for the fact that we are living in a political short-sighted context that is accelerated by the algorithms and dominated by the attention economy, the short attention economy. So it's really hard to create and to offer medium and long-term vision when you have this concerned attention with very short messages, daily messages in social media, and politicians are concerned about this, not about the other dimensions. So although the climate crisis is no longer, and it's true in Europe, eventually in Brazil, you don't have this perception so clear, but here in Europe, we're talking about war, about rearming Europe. So we are no longer talking about the sustainable development in Europe. But although the climate crisis is not in the agenda by now, it remains deeply concerning. And he warned that this 1.5 target has been already surpassed, and we were approaching 1.8 degrees. And with the project increased more or less 0.8 degrees per decade. And what he calls attention to the irreversible consequences of this. And it's really concerning that the climate crisis is exposing the fragility of our global systems. I don't know if you remember the Los Angeles wildfires 1 year ago. This is the Main Street sign burned by the fire. And it calls attention to the need for a profound transformation in the way we live together, we produce, or we take care of others. But as you might know and might understand, this is not easy. And talking about what can we do? So as sociologists or urban planners or geographers, we understand that there are some key actors and key elements that can have a central role. And cities, as you know, they are at the center of this turbulence because it's the place where we all live. And they can be a double role. They can be both the engines of the emissions, as you know, this year where the most part of people and the mobility takes place, but they can be at the same time the engine of change. So they hold this paradox to turn eventually vulnerability into resilience, and this crisis as an opportunity to a collective action. But as you know, this is important. But to do this, we have to restore the space for a deep strategic and scientific thinking with governments and public institutions and universities, especially, in a time dominated by these cycles of urgency and growing influence of a particular dangerous denial movements. So we must discuss also our role as universities, researchers, in fostering this deeper and long-term vision, and also a way of thinking, the rationality that we have and we can bring to discussion. And eventually, one of the central discussions is what is the model of society you want to build? What kind of transition, climatic, demographic, and urban, are we able or capable to do? And to talk about transition, it's not the same to talk in Central Europe, Southern America, or Asia or Africa. So the transition must be understandable for citizens. They must be fair and balanced. And eventually they must be mediated by organizations, by public administration to help the groups that have a more disadvantaged position. So this is one of the questions that I would like to develop during this presentation. And eventually the challenge that you raised us is, what is the role of urban sociology in this time of planetary turbulence? And how can we make sense in the middle of this storm and looking for a new beginning in a lot of parts of the world? And eventually to begin this discussion is to look at what are the role of the conventional urban models. Now, we understand that they are also collapsing. There are a lot of symptoms. You look at literature and you can find urban crisis as a central theme in the research and also at the public policy discussion. And there are a lot of symptoms of these urban crises. You can see the housing exclusion, loneliness, the mobility, and also some social and territorial inequalities. So we are witnessing in somehow an exhaustion of what we can consolidate the modern urban model or the urban lifestyle that once promised some kind of prosperity, but didn't create the prosperity for all. So it created a lot of inequalities and disconnection. So we are living in a world, in particular in Central and Europe, where population is aging, and cities must reinvent themselves to support and care these groups and to offer them a better life. At the same time, and especially in Europe, and in Portugal, a huge housing crisis is developing in the last years. Cities like Lisbon and Porto, the middle class salary, they cannot afford to live here. And a recent report from the European Council from this week, they said that Lisbon, Barcelona, and Madrid, they are the cities where residents allocate the highest percentage of their salary to housing costs. Imagine, the Southern Europe cities are the one who have the highest cost of housing. And as you know, I'm speaking from Aveiro, which is a small or medium-sized city in Portugal. Even at the medium-sized cities, we face the same problem, the same challenge. So the population and one of the responsibles for the increasing of the housing costs is the mass tourism and the search for tourism, and that is being huge and with a very strong impact in the real estate market, but also in the lifestyle and in the use of the city, in the use of the services of the city. To have an idea, we have in the first half of 2025 more than 690 million travel. So this is a huge impact in our lives, in the lives of our cities. And at the same time, in each of the city, and I know that the context in Southern America, in Brazil particularly, it's different from Portugal and Europe. But to have an idea what we are looking and we are understanding is an increase of the role of the car in our daily lives. More than 66%, and even talking about sustainable mobility and active mobility in the last 10 years, the number of the persons that walk and cycle is decreasing. which is a completely paradox. And to understand that the use of the car is also very strange to have, you know, this data. 95% of the time of the car, he is parked. So more or less about 23 hours a day. So it's completely irrational, but we are facing a lot of difficulties to change this reality and this paradigm. And the public space that was used by us, I imagine most of us played in the public space, in the streets. Nowadays, and a report from El País in Spain recently said that only 1/3 of children play regularly in the streets, 3 times less than their parents and grandparents. So public space has been replaced, not a place for civic life, but to private consumption. So the public space has been replaced by not where we get together, but by the digital connection or the private consumption. So we don't have the leisure public space for children and for all of us. And the city, and as I've mentioned before, it reveals a lot of contradictions. At the same time is where solidarity and innovation emerge, but where inequality, loneliness, and exclusions have the major impact. And this is, for us who works with social sciences, this can be such a powerful research and research action topic. How can we, as researchers and actors, can change this reality? And in what way can we build or rebuild the sense of belonging in these places, these fragmented places? And my thesis, my proposal to debate is eventually we need to create or to stimulate a new form of urban sociability, what we can and have been developed, designed or conceptualized as the proximity city, and eventually new collaborative tools where we can develop this. So eventually this can be 2 approaches. So the city of proximity and the civic lab as sociology propose or answer. I don't know. This is for debate for sure. So as we seen this, their cities, they embody a lot of contradictions, but they offer at the same time possibilities of renewal, of reimagination, the life we can have. And eventually these 2 topics, they can offer a space, the idea of the city of proximity and these participatory spaces, they can offer opportunities to listen, to co-create, to experiment, and turn this anxiety, this feeling of uncertainty in some collective action. And the proximity city, you know, you study urban sociology, you remember Clarence Perry in Chicago 100 years ago. He created this concept of neighborhood units. And more or less in the 60s, Jane Jacobs also talked about the dense and multifunctional city. So this idea of proximity, which is not only physical proximity, it's also relational proximity, is not a new concept. The 15-minute city, as in Europe we are spreading, this is both a spatial and a social idea. So it is the idea to create a city of care where the short distance can be reduced among people, institutions, and decisions. So it is a way to articulate ecological, social, and democratic dimensions, and to rebuild trust and interdependency in our lives, in our urban lives. And to do this, so this is not a top-down, this is not a recipe that we can apply for every place. We need to understand in what way we can build this. So this concept of participatory civic labs, these informal spaces where different types of actors, citizen researchers, local authorities can co-create projects that answer their needs. So we place the citizens as co-creator of projects, and in a sense we can call it an incubator of the community spirit. So we are doing research with people, not about them, and combine the listening, the co-creation, and to understand in what way we can balance the risks. And the idea is really to prototype new social answers and governance models to the problems of cities and society. So the idea of civic labs is briefly understood as a call for ideas and collective actions. So you have a call for projects, a prototyping, and then the discussion about the continuity. So briefly, what we have done here, and eventually to highlight with some examples, we have tried to develop this concept, this civic lab, in several cities, big cities and small cities. So we have Matosinhos, which is in the north of Portugal. We work with the municipality to involve citizens to answer to the climate transition challenge. So we want citizens, and we understand that climate transition is not something that the municipality decides to do or to enterprises to do. So it must be a shared effort. And it's very important to involve citizens and to understand and to ask them to bring ideas to answer the topics related with climate transition, like food, energy, mobility, consumption, or CO2 capture. So the idea is to transform what we can call it the collective intelligence in practice and in actions, and to experiment transformations and then to celebrate. So this is briefly what we did in Matosinhos. This is a call for action. So it's very important to highlight and this is also a literacy and a pedagogic effort. So we show citizens what are the areas that you can work when we talk about climate transition, mobility, food, energy, and non-food consumption. And it's very important because this is a participatory to spread the word, to communicate, to invite people to participate. And then we had more than 40 proposals. We select some of them. We began to talk about what this vegan food, fruit trees, vegetable gardens, mobility issues, upcycling, and knowledge about CO2 and water. And what is amazing is the framework of civic ideas, they're quite coherent. So we will invite citizens to bring ideas and then bring a set of very articulated, coherent, and relevant actions. And then the Civic Lab, what does is invite people in places, in rooms like these, to co-create, to identify using very easy tools like the problem tree or a project framework that we are, as researchers and technicians, are used to do. So we invite citizens to learn how to do this, to transform one idea in a project and then an action. And what we do is, of course, we are developing, we are sharing methods and learning from previous experiences. We are not beginning from scratch. We give voice to citizens, so they are working in different groups, but they share to each other. They have technical advice, so this is not only a bottom-up initiative. It is framed and supported by knowledge, scientific knowledge, and this brings community, and this is a community building exercise where we have to celebrate, where we celebrate a lot. In the end, to celebrate, we organized a festival, a climate festival, and we had a lot of activities and initiatives that highlighted and showed the civic work. As you can see, this was quite, it was a full day and in the public space. So everyone, not only the participants, but all the citizens could understand, and involving different ages with different activities. What have we learned from this? First of all, that we had a lot of projects, more than 80 participants. We offered the opportunity to create dialogue between citizens, technicians, politicians, and they understand the way they could influence and align public policies and the agendas towards climate transition, and the importance of the existing knowledge. So we have a lot of types of knowledge that we could align and articulate and to avoid inventing the wheel, as I've already said, to co-create and to strengthen what we can call a network for change, involving different organizations, and also the urgency of promoting actions that can expand the imaginary of the possible. You know, we are, for a long time, we were framed with the idea of the TINA, you know, there is no alternative. And there is alternative. We can do it, and we can build these kind of examples. And then another example, a brief example, so I can conclude, is a very small city where the concept of city of proximity was experimented. We focus on topics similar to the ones, and see how we can express and clarify what is the urban proximity. So what we mean by food, mobility, energy, circular economy, and neighborhood networks. So offering this frame and ask citizens to bring ideas and to build them, we can make impact in communities. We can transform, for instance, an urban plot into a community garden, fostering these ties and the sustainability. Or we can create and promote sustainability, mobility, or other actions related with upcycling in the city center, or eventually to involve citizens to rethink their playgrounds and turn their ideas into more inclusive public spaces. So local scale matters. This is one of the other conclusions. We need to reinforce trust and alignment, and sometimes good answers need good questions. So we must ask society first, what are the needs, and then to bring this kind of tools. And in the ending, the set of examples, an Iberian network of civic labs has been developed recently. Also, there are networks involving also Latin American countries. So this is an opportunity to share methodologies and to bring, to reinvent public institutions through this role. So to end, what these experiences shows is that sociology can become experimental again, not only analytical, but also generative. So it's not explaining how society behaves, but also to rehearse its transformation. So to end, we have to drag on the idea and on the notions of research activism. So we have to invite scientists and researchers, and to have a dialogue with citizens to take advantage of civic imaginations. So our role is more than mediators and listeners, but also co-creators of urban futures. So we are living and to end, we are living in what you call it the perfect storm. But these perfect storms can be also an opportunity, a moment to renewal, and to learn to navigate this storm. So this research activist approach, this means to balance scientific rigor with social action, to embrace these emotional and ethic dimensions, and to have failure as part of the learning process. So the civic imagination, so the ability and the capacity to envision and to prototype urban futures, can help to create what we can call an urban hope sociology that studies but also co-creates this kind of micro-utopias that I've shared. So to conclude, what the metaphor that I used in the beginning of the fever, so healing can require imagination, as you know, care, and collective action. One of the major conclusions and lessons that I can bring from my experience is that knowledge is distributed across different stakeholders. It is not concentrated in the universities or in institutions. But effective solutions, they have to be first tested locally before being scaled. And we must expand what we called the imaginary of the possible, so to go beyond the reality that we know. So more than technical answers, eventually we need places where these good questions can be asked and where the solutions can be built with everyone's hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mota, for your inspiring reflections on the sociological dimensions of urban space and the multiple scales of the collapse of this unconventional urban model and lifestyle that you mentioned. But at the same time, you brought the hopeful sociology, right? With inspiring examples on how to change this reality with collective action, which is it's a hope for us. Your work reminds us that cities are living systems, places of both resilience and inequality, deeply affected by planetary turbulence. So a lot of things to think on and to work on. So now I will invite Professor Edna Castro to share her insights from the field of political sociology, focusing on the connections between power, territory, and collective action. I'm going to make a brief transition because the next presentation will be in Portuguese. Unfortunately, we don't have simultaneous translations, but for those who don't understand the language, the lecture will be available on the same YouTube channel, and you will be able to review it with subtitles later. So, eu convido agora a professora Edna Castro para compartilhar as suas reflexões no campo da sociologia política, com foco nas conexões entre poder, território e ação coletiva. Professora Edna, a palavra é sua. A senhora também terá mais ou menos 30 minutos para sua apresentação. Obrigada.
Muito obrigada pela apresentação, Jaqueline. É um prazer conhecê-la. E também eu queria agradecer, não é, em nome da professora Leila Ferreira, esse gentil convite para participar desse primeiro Seminário Internacional da LABGEC. É sempre um grande prazer estar com a equipe de vocês, não é? Daqui da Unicamp, por sinal eu estou aqui na Unicamp também, vim para a Unbox e agora eu estou aqui em Campinas, e então é um grande prazer e também poder trocar algumas ideias, não é? Trocar algumas experiências e também uma reflexão sobre esse tema importante que foi proposto na mesa redonda 6, que é a sociologia dos processos urbanos na turbulência climática planetária. Nós estamos, assim, diante de uma COP30 que vai ocorrer na cidade de Belém dentro de 2 semanas, praticamente, e os temas relacionados à cidade, não é? As áreas urbanas e a as mudanças, alterações que vêm ocorrendo no clima, também passaram a se tornar, assim, um tema e uma problemática, digamos, de pesquisa da maior relevância, né? Então, é mais ou menos nessa perspectiva que eu vou fazer a minha explanação, me baseando um pouco nas experiências, e também eu gostaria de tomar um pouco de tempo para falar sobre os processos que ocorrem com relação ao urbano na Amazônia, não é? E também dizer que as ciências sociais e a sociologia, em particular, ela se defronta, nesse momento, com questionamentos fundamentais, não é? Inclusive da dificuldade de trabalhar com conceitos, trabalhar com experiências metodológicas anteriores que talvez que estão exigindo uma revisão, não é, paradigmática, e talvez algumas rupturas com conceitos e com perspectivas que nós adotamos na tradição da sociologia. Isso por quê? Porque nós estamos diante de uma situação em que a ciência, na contemporaneidade, ela se coloca novos problemas, né? Novas questões de como lidar com as temporalidades, como lidar com a questão da própria noção dos espaços, da diferença dos espaços, que são conceitos que atravessam as ciências sociais e que sentimos assim uma certa fragilidade em dar conta da compreensão desse mundo que muda tão rapidamente, que nos coloca diante de inúmeros desafios. Então, então eu vejo assim como a ciência diante de crises, né, de policrises da contemporaneidade, e uma relevância, portanto, de se entender as relações entre ciência e democracia. Quer dizer, um entendimento de processos políticos, portanto, né, em que a ciência se defronta de uma maneira diferente, e o que significa ciência e democracia, conhecimento e política, e a necessidade de um olhar constante, atualizado, sobre as mudanças nas dinâmicas globais e geopolíticas e nos desafios impostos à comunidade científica como um todo, não é? Aí não só das humanidades, para se pensar a construção do futuro. Quer dizer, nós estamos sendo impactados, portanto, para dar contas do presente, mas, ao mesmo tempo, nós temos desafios na própria, digamos assim, concepção, não é? Ou no que podemos ter como uma certa regularidade ou certas certezas na construção, mesmo que elas não sejam totalmente seguras, né? Mas alguma certeza com relação e regularidade com relação ao futuro. Então, eu vou examinar essas questões sobre alguns pontos de vista. Primeiro, que eu diria é que nós vivemos num momento de múltiplas crises, não é? Simultâneas, interpostas também, que alguns autores estão chamando de policrises, não é? E que tem a ver com dinâmicas políticas, sociais, econômicas, não é? E também, eu diria com muita assim, ênfase, né? E também com as mudanças tecnológicas. Se nós pensamos, por exemplo, todo esse processo histórico que nós vivemos dos últimos 250 anos para cá, né? Desde a Revolução Industrial, nós passamos por vários processos e vários momentos, né? Que alguns autores também consideram como fases diferentes do próprio processo de desenvolvimento da tecnologia e da economia capitalista, e chegamos a um momento em que, digamos assim, essas transformações econômicas importantes, não é? Que se colocam como de uma economia 4.0, elas colocam, as ciências sociais se defrontam com essas mudanças que vêm desse novo momento da própria Revolução Industrial, não é? Digamos assim, e que interpela, portanto, os nossos cânones, né, da ciência, não é? O que nós aprendemos, nós aprendemos, e também nós aprendemos para ensinamos, e que muitas vezes eles não estão suficientes para se poder levar em frente a compreensão do mundo atual. Então, eu acho que a sociologia, como as ciências humanas, hoje, elas se encontram diante de uma necessidade de fazer uma reflexão que talvez nós disséssemos, até uma reflexão filosófica, não é? Sobre a profundidade dessas crises. Só que eu gostaria de dizer que, assim como o mundo deslizou para essas profundas crises, né, que se congregam, que se interpõem, a grande diferença agora, que isso faz parte, claro, todo um debate sobre tudo da economia, sobre o capitalismo, mostra que a crise faz parte do próprio processo de desenvolvimento. Mas a diferença que se percebe agora é que são crises de alcance global, não é? E que elas indicam desdobramentos que nós temos que ter muito cuidado, porque eles podem ser desdobramentos terríveis, como no caso não só das mudanças climáticas, mas também da própria dinâmica do capitalismo. Então, é importante nós imaginarmos que esses processos eles podem ser de alto nível de conflitualidade histórica e de até mesmo impedimento da continuidade de um processo civilizatório, não é? Então, nós podemos dizer também que se nós pegarmos autores clássicos da sociologia, por exemplo, a análise crítica de Marx sobre o capitalismo, ou do Weber, por exemplo, né, nós vamos ver que a crítica à modernidade e a crítica às próprias dinâmicas desse processo civilizatório já estavam postas não é? Elas já estavam postas desde a origem das interpretações no campo da sociologia. Então, não é que seja uma novidade a percepção sobre esses processos, não é? Mas nós estamos diante de uma perspectiva de uma possibilidade, não é? De um colapso social e ambiental com o qual nós nos defrontamos no presente. E também as nossas projeções tendem a ser cada vez mais curtas, não é? Quer dizer, o que será a crise climática, como ela estará daqui a 10 anos, ou daqui a 20 anos? No início de toda essa percepção dessa turbulência, não é? Que acabou, turbulência antrópica, não é? Que tem toda uma dimensão antrópica, nós projetávamos as mudanças há 50 anos, daqui a 100 anos, etc., e hoje nós também temos que diminuir o tempo para poder nos colocar diante de possibilidades de solução. Não é? Eu acho que isso essa é a problematização, quer dizer, como eu vejo, não é? Eu problematizo, antes de falar da questão urbana, falando um pouco dessa questão geral, e dizer que tem a ver também, né, dois outros pontos importantes, com um crescimento do mundo, da população, um crescimento da intercomunicação, não é? Mas também o avanço das desigualdades sociais, porque nós somos contemporâneos da observação sobre o que cresceu de desigualdade social, de desterritorialização, de expulsão de populações de territórios, de refugiados. Então, nós temos números crescentes, não é? Que nos levam também a reflexionar sobre o próprio modelo de desenvolvimento do qual, há 200 anos atrás, se criava expectativas de uma melhor justiça social ou de redução das desigualdades, etc. Então, passado esse tempo, não é? É claro que o balanço ele acaba sendo quase que uma imposição para se entender a sociedade contemporânea e seus problemas. Então, essa questão do aumento da desigualdade, de aumento de população, o segundo ponto que eu rolaria também nesse item, as mudanças climáticas irreversíveis, não é? Com alertas que têm sido sistematicamente chamados a atenção, desde a Conferência de Estocolmo de 1972, se a gente considera como a primeira grande reunião de tomada de contas, não é, desses processos de sustentabilidade, eu não digo do planeta, em sustentabilidade do modelo econômico, e que acabaram sendo os relatórios dos painéis intergovernamentais sobre mudanças climáticas, do IPCC, eles acabaram sendo desconsiderados, não é? Têm sido desconsiderados, embora eles tenham um papel muito importante de sinalizar essa transformação que vem ocorrendo. Outro ponto também é que esse modelo que nós falamos, quer dizer, o modelo de desenvolvimento que ele cada vez aparece, me parece, pelo menos a mim parece, mais longe da palavra sustentabilidade, não é? Tem no extrativismo uma base fundamental, quer dizer, não é que o extrativismo da natureza, a exploração dos recursos naturais, a exploração da riqueza do solo, do subsolo, etc., ele seja novo, mas ele hoje tem um patamar diferente em relação à escala, não é? Em relação à escala de produção, em relação à escala do transporte, de grandes distâncias e de volumes muito grandes também, de mercadorias, e tem a ver também com o processo digamos assim, de turbulência, do tamanho da turbulência que pode provocar dentro dos ecossistemas e dos biomas. Então, o extrativismo passa a ser, não é o modelo em si, mas ele é parte essencial do modelo atual de desenvolvimento, não é? Em cuja a base da matriz energética global e que são indispensáveis à dinâmica que move a sociedade capitalista do consumo e da acumulação. É o caso, por exemplo, do petróleo, do carvão, do gás natural, do urânio, minérios, água potável, a energia concentrada no solo, que está sendo intensivamente utilizado para a agricultura, não é? E produção de commodities, e como essas dinâmicas do extrativismo, elas têm provocado tensões geopolíticas crescentes, não é? Tanto a nível geopolítico mesmo, como também tensões sentidas em territórios diferentes, de biomas diferentes, como no caso, por exemplo, no Brasil, nós estamos acompanhando diretamente o que vem ocorrendo com o Cerrado, estamos acompanhando o que vem ocorrendo com o bioma do Pantanal e também com a Amazônia. Então, para localizar assim um exemplo do crescimento, nós pegamos os dados estatísticos, nós vemos que há um crescimento, assim, uma curva crescente muito, muito íngrema do extrativismo nas diferentes áreas econômicas, mas e também há um aumento contínuo também dos conflitos de terra e dos processos de tensões que aparecem nos territórios. Então, há um crescimento de uma e de outro, e não uma redução em relação a esse processo, a essa relação, né? Outro ponto importante é que, na economia 4.0, há uma conformação do capital, nós estamos observando um principal declínio dos regimes democráticos em escala global pela desagregação do tecido social e pelo advento de uma outra forma de gestão, digamos assim, da gestão da vigilância, do controle, não é? Que é chamado o capitalismo da vigilância, por alguns autores, ou o capitalismo do controle excessivo, e que, em parte, é responsável também quer dizer, não, isso faz parte do quadro, né, digamos assim, de uma crise política da democracia, porque nós temos observado que cresce também no mundo os governos, né, os regimes autoritários, e encontra legitimidade grupos autoritários, governos autoritários, não é? Se quisermos dizer, de direita, de extrema direita, e o que torna, portanto, não é? Que é um debate importante, me parece, uma discussão sobre a democracia, do lugar da democracia, a capacidade da democracia de se manter como uma dimensão, como um conceito da ordem social mundial, ou o perigo que ela tem o perigo que nós temos, né, de vermos nos nossos países uma vulnerabilização dos processos democráticos, das instituições democráticas, dos valores e assim por diante. Então, isso compõe, portanto, são desdobramentos que têm a ver com essas múltiplas crises. Eu não vou descer muito a detalhes aqui, mas esse é um debate assim, muito atual, que me parece muito importante, porque, no caso do Brasil, por exemplo, nós que fazemos ciência aqui, que fazemos ciências sociais, que temos tantas pesquisas, tantos grupos de trabalho percorrendo todos os campos da sociologia, nós, de uma sociologia crítica, né, nós nos deparamos e fomos, digamos assim, impactados com o crescimento da direita, né, há poucos anos agora atrás, o crescimento da direita, da extrema-direita, de governos altamente liberais, neoliberais, não é? E que a nossa sociologia não foi capaz, talvez, de prevenir. Então, por isso, o alerta que a análise do meio ambiente ela nos remete a uma análise também da crise política, que é mundial, não é? Ela também tem essa dimensão de ser global, não é? São processos globais, iguais à questão da economia e das mudanças climáticas. Então, eu acho que, pensando um pouco a ciência, o lugar do campo científico, nessa perspectiva, né, e quais as contribuições das ciências sociais, das suas reflexões sobre essa realidade e as crises que o mundo passa atualmente. Eu vejo como um momento assim de grandes transformações. Eu lembro, tenho até relido o Polanyi para entender melhor quando ele falava das grandes transformações, não é? E entender como e a discussão que ele fazia entre economia e sociedade. Eu acho que isso é um ponto importante na sociologia do Polanyi, e mostrando essa dificuldade, momentos de grandes transformações, de se pensar e encontrar soluções, porque a ciência também está sendo interpelada, ela está sendo questionada sobre a sua capacidade ou não de entender esses processos, e outro ponto também, a sua capacidade ou não de interferir de uma maneira positiva nesses processos, né? Então, isso eu vejo um pouco numa análise do balanço da trajetória do debate intelectual e político sobre o conhecimento e a contribuição das ciências sociais, ainda que parcial, que poderia nos ajudar a identificar os sentidos subjacentes a essas mudanças do mundo de hoje. Né? Posso continuar? E que predominaram também, sobretudo desde o século XX. Chama atenção para abordagens contemporâneas, vindo sobretudo da tradição do pensamento crítico formulado no âmbito das ciências, tais como a sociologia, a antropologia, a geografia, os movimentos sociais insurgentes, que têm um debate muito importante, também uma contribuição importante, as teorias feministas, a ecologia política e os estudos pós-coloniais e subalternos, que têm reproblematizado essas questões à luz do pensamento sobre as policrises. Eu gostaria agora de entrar no segundo ponto, que é mais relacionado à questão urbana, não é? Eu vou usar, sobretudo, como exemplo, a discussão sobre a Amazônia, mas eu queria dizer que as mudanças climáticas, né, como o professor José Carlos Mota apresentou tão bem na exposição dele, elas atingem o mundo inteiro e, quer dizer, são processos muito complexos, não é? Que temos até dificuldade de analisar e que têm impactos que são diferenciados. Nós podemos dizer que há impactos diferenciados em relação ao sul, ao norte, tem várias pesquisas que estão sendo realizadas e mostrando onde estão os espaços mais vulneráveis, quais são os lugares que podem, tanto do ponto de vista da ecologia, como do ponto de vista da vida social, né, da fragilidade social, dos países que têm menor nível de democracia, de justiça social, enfim, de políticas sociais. Então, essa vulnerabilidade ela passa também ao interior do próprio sistema, né, capitalista, do sistema mundo, de diferenciação entre de países e países, mas também ela tem esses impactos, eles têm uma certa margem de, talvez, que escape, não é? Uma certa margem de direção desses impactos que escapa à nossa percepção, não é? Porque essas mudanças elas ocorrem, elas podem ocorrer nos territórios, mas tem uma parte que nós vamos aprendendo à medida que os impactos vão ocorrendo. Então, essa é também uma vulnerabilidade temporal que independe da nossa expertise e sobre a qual nós não temos realmente capacidade de avaliar. Então, no caso das mudanças climáticas, o que se observa e que tem sido analisado é que as cidades elas serão grandemente impactadas, não é? Porque a maior parte da população humana encontra-se nas cidades, as políticas, seja de mitigação e seja de adaptação, não é? Elas devem se direcionar muito para as cidades por causa dessa concentração populacional, mas eu acho que é importante também que se crie um coeficiente um coeficiente sobre como lidar com essas expertises em relação às mudanças climáticas e as novas experiências que estão sendo feitas nas áreas urbanas. Então, eu vejo, por exemplo, como que nós vivemos com relação a isso, né? Nós vivemos um momento de encruzilhada, não é? É como se uma curva, sem se reconhecer ou se ter bem claro para onde segue o caminho, né? Quer dizer, o que é que vem depois dessa curva, ou podemos dizer que é uma inflexão, um momento crucial que ainda podemos pensar em possibilidades de prevenção, de proteção, de mitigação face a esses eventos extremos, e importante de buscar um equilíbrio entre as áreas urbanas e as áreas não urbanas, né? As áreas de floresta, com relação à regulação das águas e de outros biomas, de manguezais, etc. Eu falo em floresta, mas incluindo manguezais, áreas de várzea, etc. Então, um novo equilíbrio que teria que ser posto para essa relação urbano e não urbano, não é? Levando em consideração que os impactos ele tem a ver também com a concentração da população em áreas, digamos, em menos áreas do que uma população que estivesse mais espalhada no território do planeta, né? Então, nós contamos com esses diagnósticos. O que se tem observado nas últimas décadas, e sobretudo nessa última década, foi o aparecimento de eventos climáticos mais extremos, né, quer dizer, mais impactantes, com menor velocidade, como muitos estudos já mostraram. Antes era uma suposição, agora são dados realmente contabilizados, não é? E que mostram a vulnerabilidade, portanto, de regiões relacionadas à água, né? E aí a gente já tem mais ou menos as cotas de alagamento que vamos encontrar dentro de pouco tempo, já começa a aumentar, pode começar a aumentar. Então, isso tem a ver com esses impactos que nós observamos com relação à água em diferentes países do mundo, ilhas que desapareceram, pequenas cidades que desapareceram, pelo aumento da cota oceânica, não é? E do aquecimento global, e, sobretudo, pelos focos de incêndio. Eu acho que isso é importante se levar em consideração, porque nunca tivemos situações tão graves de cidades impactadas pelo incêndio, como observamos ano atrasado e ano passado, no caso, por exemplo, da costa pacífica dos Estados Unidos e muitos outros países, na Europa, não é? No Brasil também, que povoados, os incêndios, focos de incêndios acabaram se alastrando e chegando em áreas de adensamento populacional. Então, um aumento enorme também com relação a essa questão do preocupante, que é o aumento dos focos de incêndio ao longo do planeta. Eu gostaria de entrar num terceiro ponto, não é? Talvez eu vá me dedicar um pouco mais de tempo, que é pensar a Amazônia. Eu pensei em trazer essa discussão aqui, primeiro porque eu trabalho com esse tema, não é? E também porque nós estamos diante da COP, né, que vai acontecer, e que me preocupa muito, porque os temas que estão sendo debatidos, pelo menos no Brasil, com relação à COP, eles não, pela minha observação, né, eles têm, digamos assim, contornado questões que são fundamentais para serem discutidas justamente nesses eventos globais, como a questão do próprio modelo de desenvolvimento, dos impactos, por exemplo, do extrativismo do agronegócio, da mineração, do uso, por exemplo, de mercúrio em garimpos, não é? Enfim, de atividades que são altamente consumidoras de água, não é? E que remetem, claro, a um outro padrão tecnológico altamente, digamos assim, eficaz do ponto de vista do processo de produção de mercadorias e de acumulação de riqueza, né? Um processo que produz realmente volumes maiores de riqueza, mas que são altamente, tem também um grau elevado de poluição e de transformação desses territórios. E esse tema, que me parece central, ele tem sido contornado, não é? Vocês podem observar, estão fazendo 2 dias que teve um pronunciamento do presidente da COP, né, da comissão organizadora da COP, que estava junto com a Tony, e dizendo que uma das decisões principais, das conduções principais, seria os processos adaptativos, né? Seria numa linha, digamos assim, da adaptação. Eu, sinceramente, eu acho que é muito importante se pensar em adaptação, mas a adaptação tem limites, porque você não sabe até quando se pode fazer adaptação. Por exemplo, se a cidade está tocando fogo, aí você tem que ter, a única solução é sair da cidade, não é? Enfim, eu estou um pouco exagerando, mas é isso, porque o que tem nos chamado muito a atenção é a questão dos focos de incêndio, a dificuldade que nós temos de controlar esses processos, por causa do vento, da velocidade do vento, por causa de uma série de fatores, não é? Então, quando você pensa numa solução, uma reunião intergovernamental para discutir o tamanho do problema que nós temos em mãos, não é? E as soluções não forem na direção mais impactantes, ou de diminuir o volume da produção, enfim, eu estou jogando alguns pontos, mas eu vou depois amarrar melhor. E sair para propor processo de adaptação, que a gente sabe que tem um limite, não é? Que tem um tempo de limite, enquanto isso, os processos que são realmente aviltantes à natureza e provocadores de mudanças climáticas, eles vão continuar o curso deles. Então, é como se nós andamos devagar para uma solução, quando os processos eles vão muito mais rápido. Então, jamais a tendência é aumentar o gap entre, não é? Entre uma forma de solução não eficaz e os processos que vão continuar crescendo. Então, essa preocupação ela me parece assim, muito importante. A Amazônia ela segue um pouco a tendência brasileira, com mais de 85% da população vivendo nas cidades. O Brasil tem um percentual ainda maior, porém, já é um percentual imenso, quer dizer que a maior parte da população amazônica, de 30 milhões aproximadamente de habitantes, não é? Da Amazônia brasileira, que se distribui em 772 municípios, nos seus 9 estados da federação. Ela tem em torno de 30 milhões de habitantes e tem a média, segue mais ou menos essa média de 85% da população vivendo em cidades, considerando um padrão urbano que talvez não é o mesmo padrão brasileiro, uma vez que muitas cidades amazônicas elas são pequenas cidades, não é? E que cidades em torno com menos de 20 mil habitantes, não é? Ou cidades de 20 a 50 mil habitantes, são apenas 27% da população. E 2 grandes cidades com em torno de 2 milhões de habitantes, que são Belém e Manaus. Manaus tem uma população um pouco maior que Belém. E poucas cidades médias. Então, essa rede urbana de cidades amazônicas ela tem uma configuração diferente, não é? Um pouco diferente. Se pensar um pouco esses dados, apenas dados quantitativos, aparece um padrão diferente. Mas o mais importante que eu observo é que esse padrão ele contém, essas pequenas cidades, povoados, contém uma densidade cultural muito grande, que é onde estão a diversidade cultural, linguística, étnica, social dos povos que vivem na Amazônia, não é? Então, o que a gente chama, mais ou menos, um processo de urbanização para além da fronteira, não é? De uma fronteira, digamos assim, das novas populações que chegaram, porque tem uma ocupação antiga, urbana antiga, e que dá uma densidade cultural e de saberes sobre a natureza bem diversificados. São experiências assim importantes de compreensão na perspectiva indígena, que vem das perspectivas, vou falar no plural, indígenas, da perspectiva também quilombola, de populações ribeirinhas, de populações de pescadores, de trabalhadores com a floresta, né, de vários atividades, e que concebem a relação sociedade-natureza diferente. Então, há uma cosmovisão importante que tem sido, digamos assim, uma espécie de parceira do debate ambiental, não é? Há uma parceria, há uma troca de conhecimentos agroecológicos e que faz com que a sociedade mundial considere que na Amazônia existe uma ecologia política, não é? Ou podemos dizer assim, uma ecologia política com saberes tradicionais que pode aportar conhecimentos para ajudar nessa crise ambiental. Eu queria fazer uma ressalva dizendo que eu considero que isso é válido, é importante, não é? São epistemologias diferentes, não são conhecimentos como se dizia algum tempo atrás, conhecimentos, digamos, tradicionais, que não são conhecimentos muito valiosos. Eu considero como epistemologias, porque são sistemas de conhecimento encontrados lá dentro da floresta, encontrados nos rios, subindo os diferentes rios da Amazônia. São sistemas de conhecimento, são sistemas, enquanto epistemologias completamente diferentes da nossa concepção da relação sociedade-natureza, porém, o que tem acontecido a nível global é que tem sido depositado nesses conhecimentos como uma solução para resolver os problemas ambientais. Aí eu acho que eu queria um pouco fazer a crítica, porque eu considero assim uma espécie de apropriação e, ao mesmo tempo, de você reputar a determinados segmentos da sociedade o poder de transformar aquilo que a sociedade não quer discutir, que é o próprio modelo causador dos processos de degradação ambiental, não é? Então, eu faço essa ressalva para dizer, bom, você pode caminhar por um romantismo e dizer que essas populações elas são capazes, como está acontecendo, inclusive sobre a COP tem muita digamos assim, venda verde, né? Negócios verdes, do colonialismo verde, que reputa esses saberes como portadores da solução. Então, é uma maneira de não falar exatamente no que precisa ser pensado com seriedade e com uma certa radicalidade quanto a esse processo. Então, a urbanização ela expressa todas essas interfaces, não, históricas desses saberes, e que as pesquisas que nós temos feito, elas contemplam, né? Elas contemplam essa percepção dessa diversidade, desses conhecimentos e de possibilidades de trocas da sociedade moderna, digamos, com essa sociedade e saberes tradicionais, mas que é uma pouca, porém, com pouca repercussão ou com, digamos assim, uma baixa capacidade de alteração dos processos que nós temos observado, né? Então, e além disso, a cidade é o espaço mais visível no mundo inteiro, né? Não só na Amazônia. É mais visível e concentrado das diferenças de classe, das diferenças de gênero, das contradições sociais, das contradições de raça, não é? Das desigualdades raciais. Então, a cidade ela não é só um espaço, né? O espaço urbano, o espaço das instituições, o espaço dos projetos, muitas vezes, grandes projetos econômicos, não é? Não é só o lugar da produção de riqueza e da produção de conhecimento. A cidade ela é também esse lugar da desigualdade, da pobreza. E os países como o Brasil são países muito pobres. O Brasil é um país muito pobre. Se nós pensarmos nas diferenças, na desigualdade, na quantidade de pessoas que não comem, da quantidade de pessoas que vivem mal ao longo da sua vida, né? Você tem uma vida. Então, se você vive mal, na desigualdade, na pobreza, na violência, não é, doméstica, etc., praticamente você perdeu a própria vida, não é, ao longo da sua existência. Então, essas contradições, como a Sachin, por exemplo, analisa, né, e tantos autores, o Harvey, analisa a questão urbana, o Bourdieu também, aparecem esses lugares, não é? São lugares de violência e lugares de desigualdade social, racial, de gênero, que fazem, no entanto, a história dessas cidades, a história desses países. E nós tratamos, nas nossas pesquisas, como sujeitos da cidade, não é? Quer dizer, um pouco pensando no Walter Benjamin, pensando em como ele passeia pela cidade, como ele analisa os personagens da cidade, como ele acompanha, não é, as diferenças da modernidade, o que aparece de novo, aparece de moderno, as grandes galerias, e, ao mesmo tempo, a prostituta, a pessoa pobre da periferia, que circula na cidade. Então, entender essas cidades, que é a perspectiva que nós trabalhamos, entender essa cidade como sujeitos, e o que esses sujeitos falam da sua vida, falam desse trânsito no espaço urbano e também falam das mudanças climáticas. Eu acho que eu tenho uma aluna que está fazendo tese de doutorado, que ela ia fazer uma tese sobre populações que viviam em áreas de reservas extrativistas, em uma reserva extrativista, e quando houve a seca de Manaus, a seca do Amazonas, ela voltou para a cidade dela, que é Parintins, e lá ela conviveu com a seca, essa seca extrema, né, que houve no ano passado, e finalmente ela resolveu mudar o tema e tentar analisar a sensação da seca, o que as pessoas diziam sobre a vivência que tiveram nesse período tão drástico, não é? E que pode se repetir outros anos, e tentar entender essa dimensão humana, essas relações sociais diretamente, digamos assim, impactadas por um processo extremo como o que ocorreu lá. Então, assim como esse, outras pesquisas estão sendo desenhadas para entender os efeitos, por exemplo, com o aumento dos furacões, com o aumento dos tornados, não é? Em certas áreas, das chuvas ácidas, enfim, dos ventos mais fortes. Então, são processos que estão impactando o cotidiano das pessoas. Então, podemos destacar, portanto, essas dimensões da mudança, no caso de níveis diferentes de cidade, megacidades, grandes cidades centrais, mas, ao mesmo tempo, pequenas cidades e cidades médias, numa fronteira, né, com padrões de urbanização diferentes, de urbanização e de povoamento diferente.
Tá ótimo, professora, super obrigada. Professora, acho que a sua fala foi muito instigante, porque aborda justamente a forma como a sociologia reflete essas diferentes crises climáticas, né? Crise climática, política, social, demográfica, tecnológica, são muitas, né, concomitantes, e também as novas dinâmicas do capitalismo, também influenciadas por essas crises, né? As suas reflexões iluminam essa urgência do engajamento sociológico nesses tempos de turbulência, mas a partir de uma visão de sociologia que não só interpreta o mundo, mas também busca atuar dentro dele. Então, foi muito bom. Eu até vejo que a sua fala, professora, e a do professor Mota se destacam muito esse papel do território, né, como espaço de disputa, transformação nessa crise planetária, o que mostra a potência da ação local, né, para depois uma escala global, a importância da sociologia para lidar com essas policrises que a gente comentou. Eu vou ter que passar adiante, professora.
Só para finalizar, Jaqueline, eu queria dizer que a gente vive, no caso desses espaços urbanos, né, vive numa situação que foi quando eu comecei, né, como se fosse uma encruzilhada, né, e que nós temos o desafio de conhecer algumas chaves de entendimento do futuro e que alternativas, não é, que alternativas nós podemos pensar para construir uma sociedade do futuro e um outro padrão, né, definir novos padrões, né, da relação sociedade e natureza. Então, eu acho que essas são alternativas e são, ao mesmo tempo, desafios colocados para o momento que nós vivemos dessas policrises.
Com certeza, obrigada, professora. And now we will move to our debate and dialogue session, moderated by Lara Freitas. Lara, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline and Professor José Carlos and Professor Edna. What we heard, this was valuable
I can't
contribution.
hear you, Lara. I think you're muted. Yeah.
Now, you listening?
Lara is still. Yeah.
Please.
We cannot hear you.
Abriu. Okay. Now?
Yeah, now it's okay.
Thank you, Jacqueline and Professor José Carlos and Edna. I heard a valuable contribution. And for this moment, we will open the debate. And this is sixth panel. And I will begin with the first question for the both. It's a urgent moment, planetary moment. And to start this dialogue, thinking in a short term for develop the urban climate governance, what are the main paths that you could overcome the barriers to progress the mitigation and adaptation? What we need to prioritize? Please, I'd like to listen to both.
Professor Edna, quer começar?
Professora Edna, gostaria de começar?
Prefiro que ele comece.
Okay, so I will begin. So first of all, thank you, Professor Edna. It was really great to look at your perspective and how the political science can also bring and highlight the knowledge that we need to have and to produce to these urban systems and urban ecosystems, and how the capitalist models are ruling the world. So we are depending on them. So I think eventually, Lara, the question that you raised about the need to have a new governance to deal with this, I think there are a lot of barriers, and I at least stress two or three. First of all, I think it's the interdependence of these cases, of these problems. They are not, Professor Edna talked about this overlapped crisis, so we cannot individualize one of the dimensions. They are all connected. So it's really hard and difficult to develop a solution in a small place if it is not articulated with in a global perspective or an intersectoral dimension. So it's the interdependency, I think it's one of the key issues. The second is the political and ideological context. So we are living in a profound transformation of the political systems based on the short, the economy of attention for the short events and the events that are created to focus the attention. And as you can see, Donald Trump is every day he's creating some kind of distraction, and this is not a silly. This is a strategy to focus on our attention on these issues and not the structural and the strategic ones. And at the same time, we have a negationist environment, which is completely, I don't know if it is completely new, but it is supporting decision making in a lot of countries. For instance, in the United States, so there is a lot of people that deny that there is a personal and a human responsibility on climate change. So finally, the last topic is about how can we change? one of the barriers that we have to change ourselves, our lifestyle, and the way we organize cities, because in the end, everything has a spatial dimension. So the way we organize cities and our lifestyle is critical. That's why, I don't know, I hope I was clear, the importance of looking to local scale and involving citizens, because in the end, we have to be the role players, the critical players in changing our behaviors and to changing policies. So we're changing the politics that understand the need to have a different perspective and a different understanding of what's going on. And what is, as I can highlight that 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump was at the United Nations General Assembly talking. And he said at it meeting at the United Nations that climate change was complete, it doesn't exist. And he called stupid to the scientists. He called stupid to the IPCC scientists at the United Nations General Assembly. So this is a critical moment. So we need to be wise and to understand in what way we can organize ourselves, universities, local authorities, national governments, NGOs, and to bring some light to this very dark moment we are living.
Sou eu que falo, Jaqueline? Sim.
Sim, pode seguir.
Certo. Gostaria também de, seguindo essa discussão, não é? Dizer que os discursos, né, que apelam para dimensões universalistas dos problemas ambientais, como, por exemplo, dizer que houve falha de gestão ou falha da humanidade, eles acabam prestando um desserviço à sociedade ao desviarem o foco dos aspectos tangíveis da questão, que são, eu diria, esses aspectos tangíveis são políticos e econômicos. Então, eu acho que esse foco ele não pode ser perdido. E as políticas de redução, por exemplo, do desflorestamento, do desmatamento na Amazônia, né, da floresta amazônica, são ineficientes se não forem pensadas de forma integrada aos demais processos associados ao modelo econômico que exaure as energias do planeta. A sua redução, quer dizer, do processo de desmatamento, de perda de cobertura vegetal pelos focos de incêndio, a redução deles, como freio das mudanças climáticas, é incompatível com as políticas que alimentam a obsessão de agentes econômicos pela apropriação de terras, de recursos naturais e de acumulação da riqueza. Quer dizer, há uma incompatibilidade da continuidade desses processos. Então, cada vez eu penso mais que isso se tornou quase que essencial, né? Cabe lembrar também as incertezas que acompanham as boas intenções, por exemplo, as ações de mitigação e de adaptação climática, pois nós sabemos que nos eventos extremos ocorridos no Rio Grande do Sul, embora se diga que eram problemas relacionados às comportas, não é? Que não estavam bem, digamos assim, com manutenção, na realidade, esses eventos pouco saber científico e a gestão administrativa, né? A gestão teriam resolvido ou evitado esse problema. Então, são incertezas, não é? E é devastador assistir o rompimento, por exemplo, de barragens, como as barragens da mineração ou as barragens das grandes hidrelétricas ou das médias hidrelétricas, porque elas têm um tempo útil, embora as empresas não falem qual o tempo útil dessas barragens, e quando elas vão deixar, elas podem ruir, não é? Elas podem desabar com grandes desastres, como aconteceu em Barcarena, Mariana e Brumadinho. Então, essas observações parecem relevantes, porque o grande impacto sobre as áreas urbanas ele pode ser terrível, né? E por isso que, frente a essa realidade, é necessário coragem e determinação dos agentes da política e da economia. Coragem à altura dos megas problemas, né? Que as elites mundiais produziram no seu afã de modernidade e enriquecimento. Então, o debate sobre o enriquecimento, ele é um debate no centro da questão. Ai, meu Deus do céu, eu caí. Eu caí? Não. Não, tá certo. Então, só para finalizar, eu queria dizer que a política é um campo do simbólico, não é? Nós sabemos disso. É um campo do simbólico, de produção e profusão de discursos, muitas vezes difíceis de decifrar ou de identificar seus eixos e contextos. Então, a razão que subjaz interconecta poder e convencimento, não é? Então, daí a importância da pesquisa sobre esse campo político, esse campo do simbólico, e ultrapassar camadas da sua interpretação para nós podermos ter posições mais claras e eficazes com relação à contribuição da sociologia e das ciências sociais a esse grande desafio de mudanças climáticas.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. And I would like to put more question for this debate. That is, what is the main consideration for accelerating climate change response, considering climate justice and intersectionalities? Whose shared responsibility for repairing climate racism in the face of intensified extremes in urban areas? Como podemos acelerar esse processo de enfrentamento, né? Considerando a justiça climática e as interseccionalidades. Essa responsabilidade compartilhada, né, por reparar o racismo climático, sabendo que a gente vem intensificando aí, os extremos vêm intensificando essa realidade. Professor Edna, please, I'd like to listen.
Esse debate todo, ele tem, claro, essa vertente da justiça climática, não é? E eu vejo, eu tento analisar no contexto dos processos de desigualdade social, não é? Que tem muitos parâmetros que vêm das pesquisas mostrando soluções para esses problemas da desigualdade social, da desigualdade no campo da justiça, da construção da justiça ambiental, da reparação ambiental, não é? E eu me preocupo muito porque eu vejo que há embora esse debate seja tão importante e a gente tenha avançado do ponto de vista da construção de conceitos, né, a interseccionalidade, por exemplo, todos em relação a problemas de classe, de raça, de gênero, mas também uma interseccionalidade que eu aplico o conceito relacionado também à relação sociedade-natureza, não é? Assim, numa espécie de uma revisão da ecologia política da natureza, da ecologia política da relação sociedade-natureza, com justiça ambiental, com, digamos assim, equidade, com cuidados relacionados à natureza. Eu vejo que esse debate é marginal. Isso me preocupa. Hoje estávamos conversando aqui no grupo, né, aqui na POX, como continua marginal. Quer dizer, a POX está se reunindo aqui em Campinas, nós temos muita pouca discussão sobre a questão ambiental, não vi nenhuma discussão sobre COP, não é? Mas não é só aqui, também no Congresso da Sociologia, em julho, e eu, como presidente da Sociedade Brasileira de Sociologia, eu lamento também, porque o Congresso não somos nós que fazemos, são todos. E esse debate ele acaba ficando marginal, embora a gente tenha pesquisa tão bem formulada, elaborada, temos uma área ambiental que avançou muito no Brasil, não é? Mas eu sinto um pouco essa dificuldade. Agora, com relação a avanços, eu acho que a ciência ela avança, não é? Eu acho que a ciência tem muita contribuição dada. Eu acho que, sinceramente, eu acho que a ciência ela não é escutada. Nós publicamos um artigo, a André Azuri e eu publicamos um artigo na SBPC há pouco tempo, que a gente chamou Na Contramão da Ciência, Mudanças Climáticas na Contramão da Ciência, foi o título, porque a ciência ela está fazendo o seu papel, ela está falando, ela está dizendo, ela está explicando, ela está prevenindo, ela está gritando, eu diria, entende? Mas o movimento de mudança que a gente está ouvindo, por exemplo, está vendo no meio empresarial, no meio, tem muitas empresas fazendo transformação dos seus processos produtivos, não é? Porém, eu vejo, a minha avaliação, pode ser que eu esteja incorreta, eu acho que há uma projeção, por exemplo, o sistema, o processo produtivo da minha empresa, nós vamos, em 2050, nós vamos ter 20% alterado, ou no ano de 2080, né, nós vamos ter 30%. Eu acho que esse time que é usado na alteração dos processos produtivos, que vem ocorrendo, né, não é uma realidade, eles não alcançam a velocidade necessária de reversão dos processos. Então, eu acho que isso tem a ver com justiça ambiental, claro que tem a ver, porque você vê as populações urbanas da periferia, a maior parte da cidade é cidade periférica, é a cidade que vive os problemas de saneamento, vive os problemas de água, de poluição da água, de tomar água que não é potável, não é? Problemas de saneamento, problemas de doenças, uma vulnerabilidade. Essa vulnerabilidade ela aumenta na proporção que aumenta as mudanças climáticas. Então, você tem um outro potencial da injustiça ambiental, né? Que é, ao mesmo tempo, uma justiça social, injustiça social. E eu acho que, eu não sei se era nessa direção que você queria que eu falasse, mas para mostrar um pouco, mostrar que nós vivemos numa situação urbana, né? Se nós pensarmos em todas as cidades brasileiras, se nós contabilizarmos a população que já vive uma injustiça social, não é? Ela é potencial, ela pode estar numa área que é uma área de sacrifício, é uma zona de sacrifício em que você vai ser potencializada com os problemas ambientais. Então, pensar na justiça ambiental, não é? Pensar em todas essas novos regramentos jurídicos de apoio, de proteção e de cuidados, ele é super importante, mas a gente tem que ter também ser mais incisiva com relação aos principais causas desse processo, e que ninguém pode dizer que não sabe, porque todos os autores que fazem a crítica à modernidade, eles estão falando isso. Tem o Guide, e tem todos os autores, tem Bourdieu, tem, enfim, autores europeus, americanos, brasileiros, latino-americanos. Então, esse tema ele é altamente, digamos assim, do nosso domínio, não é? Enquanto ciência. Então, o problema Aí eu só finalizando uma última frase, por favor. Dizendo que daí, porque eu defendo, não quer dizer que todos defendam, todos concordem, mas eu acho que a ciência, cada vez, ela tem que ser mais pública, não é? Ela tem que cada vez ser mais também intervenção, a ciência, ela sozinha não dá conta de fazer os atores mudarem, a não ser que também a ciência seja ativista, a ciência seja militante. E isso nós passamos a trabalhar com outro padrão de ciência, não é? Com outro padrão da relação ciência, democracia, ciência, sociedade, ciência, meio ambiente. Então, isso é uma proposta que muitos cientistas da área ambiental, das ciências mais da natureza, né? Ou ciências hard, por exemplo, tem adotado, inclusive, devido aos problemas percebidos, né?
Muito obrigada, professora. Concordo fortemente com a sua abordagem, e eu acho que também trouxe um entrelaçamento, né, das duas apresentações aí na sua fala final. E I would like to know if José Carlos want to add something about his question.
Eu falo em português só este bocadinho, a dizer que concordo em absoluto com a professora Edna, porque, aliás, eu falei muito nesta dimensão da research activist, portanto, a ideia da investigação ativista, e eu acho que isso, e sobretudo num contexto de enorme fragilidade porque nós estamos a assistir na escala global uma desvalorização destas questões, ou claramente a União Europeia já não coloca com o mesmo grau de prioridade, e isto tem a ver com a influência dos partidos de extrema-direita, que, através de várias medidas, que estão colocando este tema fora, ou pelo menos fora das prioridades. So now changing to English, regarding the issue, Lara, that you have raised about how we can accelerate, but with a justice perspective or concern. And I think it's very important to center the attention on those who are most affected. So we have to remember that we are not in the same level. When we talk about transition, and I mentioned that in the presentation, the transition must be fair and with the right rhythm, because we are pushing the need to change, but we are not able to do it. And so the most affected, the poor, the people in some areas of the world, they don't have this ability to change. And we don't have the same level of economic development in all the world. So there is also inequalities that we have to take in consideration. Mm-hmm. Then we have also to articulate climate policy with social policy, because eventually, and Professor Edna mentioned that there are a lot of affordable or non-affordable communities that need to have to combine the support, their social needs and social policies with changing their energy or their food behavior. And finally, I think local communities and cities can have an important role, because this is a global, and I think there is a responsibility for enterprise of companies. We cannot put the responsibility on citizens. This is not but I think we can, as consumers and as citizens, as an activists also, we can be more, to pressure more politicians to give action, to make action in the correct way. So I think science and society must have another role, and a more active role. Otherwise, I don't feel that we would face the consequences that we will have in the near future.
Thank you, Professor José Carlos. And for finalizing this panel, I would like to invite you the last word, express the brief last words, and to close, before we close this session. Professor José Carlos, can you start?
So eu começo e a professora Edna termina, porque, em primeiro lugar, dizer que foi um grande prazer ouvi-la e ouvi-vos, e, portanto, o convite, fico muito grato. And I think this is the problem we are facing is also a democratic problem. This is not only a political. So we need to involve citizens. That's key so they can understand. So there is a literacy issue here. We need to bring knowledge and to combine knowledges, first of all, to understand reality, and second, to change it. So I think this is crucial. So I came from the participatory democracy area, the social sciences, and I think democracy is also the solution for the problem. So thank you very much.
Bom, eu queria apenas agradecer a oportunidade de estar aqui debatendo com vocês. Eu, infelizmente, não pude acompanhar as outras sessões para poder dar uma sequência. Sempre é muito importante fazer isso, mas eu estava com um monte de atividades aqui na Unboxing, né? Aí isso me impediu, eu entrei um pouco aqui e ali, mas não pude fazer a sequência que eu gostaria de ter feito. E eu queria parabenizar pelo evento e deixar um grande abraço a todos e todas.
Obrigada pelas contribuições, please.
Eu lancei esse livro agora aqui na Unboxing, Cidades Amazônicas.
Oh, great.
Se tiver interesse, posso mandar online.
Thank you very much, Professor José Carlos and Professor Edna. I would like to pass again to Jacqueline to finalize this session.
Thank you, Lara, and the participants for the questions and comments. I'd also like to thank the LABGEC team and the technical staff behind this transmission who made this event possible. It has been a collaborative and generous effort that truly reflects the spirit of LABGEC. Unfortunately, Professor Leila had to leave us due to a medical emergency involving her sister, and she asked me to convey her sincere apologies and gratitude for everyone for being part of this important discussion. And now I invite Luciana Lima to present the final message and deliver the institutional acknowledgements for this panel. Luciana.
Thank you, Jacques. Unfortunately, I have come to the end of the first LABGEC International Seminar, Defying Sociological Boundaries in the Global Climate Crisis, in celebration of the 10th anniversary of the Labs Foundation. I have here a long list of thanks for this important event. First of all, we would like to thank Professor Leila da Costa Ferreira for all her work at Unicamp and in profound dedication to the environmental and climate cause. I would like also to thank Unicamp, the Institute of Philosophy and Human Science, and also the Environment and Society program for all the support for this event. Our very special thanks to Professor Ana Paula Bortoleto, coordinator of the program, and also to Professor Roberto do Carmo, and to the collaborators Eduardo Ferreira Carvalho and Rodrigo Almeida, who supported us in the technology and communication of the seminar. I also would like to thank the members of LABGEC who helped me a lot in the organization, who is Jacqueline Nietzsche, Eduardo Prado, Arthur Haberman, Lara Freitas, Zulin, Janaína Ramasco, and Pietra Kennedy. I'd like also to express our sincere gratitude to the speakers and presenters for their important contributions, to the moderators for mediating the debate, and to the public for their presence and participation. May this encounter inspire new ideas, partnerships, contributions, and concrete actions. Finally, we plan to hold this seminar again in a second edition in 2026, and you'll be honored to count on the participation of you, of this body of high-level speakers, listeners, attendees, organizers, and supporters. Thank you. I hope to hear from you in our very next future. See you again.
Bye-bye.
Obrigado.
See you.
Bye-bye. Obrigado.
Bye-bye.